seconds left. He has 7, 6 left. Freiburg goes for the kill. He's going to pick it up. If Jesnik survives, he's going to win the round. There's no time. Oh my God, Freiburg! Are you kidding me? Win the round because of it. Yeah, now Freiburg is going to be walking around.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of By the Numbers. We had a week off, unfortunately, due to Sam being out in the wilderness. He's getting work now. Sam thinks he's a celebrity. So that's that. He doesn't even turn up to work anymore because he's living that high life in Asia, Bucharest, wherever else will have him. Right? But we got Phil as a stand-in. This is Philip, who he works for Room on Fire. Is that right? Or there he is. So Phil's doing it now. He doesn't have as good a laugh as Sam. But in many ways,
he is German. To be fair, he's born with a disability in that sense. So
humor, not their strong point. But no, we're just kidding. Obviously, Phil's a great guy. We've known him for a while. We appreciate him standing in. Guy's a legend. I'm sure you'll have seen him on the On Fire videos. So appreciate it. And Duncan, what have you been up to? Because we haven't spoken in a while. You've been out there in the wilderness.
Yeah, just doing work, usual stuff. Watching League of Legends, so nothing interesting or anything from CS. Waiting for Epicenter, which I knew was going to be a good one, because obviously it had loads of back and sick teams on the list. Very good format. So, yeah.
What about
just drank this root beer? You know, the classic root beer.
Mate, is this your attempt at
A&W? It isn't. I wish I was sponsored by anyone, mate. I told you I'll take them all.
Oh, what about Snipe? Surely there's some sort of deal there. You're always.
I'm not sponsored. I just work for them.
Oh, right.
I know. At this point, the lines blur. Quite a lot between my endeavours.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's all just money, isn't it? Yeah. That's my catchphrase, actually.
I know. I'm sure Snipe appreciate that as well. Like when you say to them, at the end of the day, it's all just money.
Give me that fucking money. You got any book beer? Taking out some guy's hand. There you go.
Oh well, yeah. I've had a good week. Obviously, was doing Injustice 2. Always great to meet another esports community, and
it's good, isn't it?
Yeah, have their reasonable reactions to Richard Lewis, alt-right leader.
Of whenever you go to any new community, because I've had this many times, obviously, is like, even though if they just encountered you with no, like, if you go into a movie completely with no information, you got your best chance of getting a good impression. But there's always those people who sort of run ahead of you, who are just mad haters, obviously. Mentally ill, I call them, but they will just get there and just be like, here's a full dossier I've worked up on why this guy is a cunt. And then everyone reads it and just goes, I'm not going to look into this, but it seems completely fine. So let's just treat him as if he indeed is the worst person ever.
Yeah, I mean, from what I can tell, my sins are this. So my sins are, I wrote for Breitbart for 7 months, which obviously,
by the way, for some people, they do that classic thing, where they'll just be like, oh, Breitbart right now is all racist stuff. Therefore, anyone who ever worked for them is a massive racist. It's like, well, that's now, isn't it? You didn't even write there now. It was years ago. You talk, and you wrote for the tech section.
Yeah, but this is what I mean. So obviously, I
concluding that Abraham Lincoln epitomized all the modern values of the Republican Party, wouldn't it? He doesn't in any way. Yeah. It's a different era.
So yeah, but I mean, so that I've actually read that several times. Like, only racists work there, or the classic quote I get spammed whenever
So it's like a racist, but
yeah. Well, actually, some do. Some say he's a Jewish white supremacist. So the thing that gets tweeted at me is always, I'm not a Nazi. I just take money from Nazis. Never met a Nazi while I was working there, of course. Like never met one. Never spoke to anyone who even had any vaguely radical views. Spent 7 months there because it was a place I could go, not get censored. I got a pay rise, and I got to work with people that I thought were all right, not to be confused with alt-right.
I'd also just love to know, none of these people have ever looked into who Andrew Breitbart was, who Steve Bannon was. None of these people in any way, in philosophy or how they live their lives, would in any context be a Nazi.
Yeah.
They would be the enemies of Nazis. Therefore, it doesn't make a lot of sense, does it?
So there's that. That I'm guilty of that. 7 months at Breitbart basically colours the entirety of my career. The other thing, of course, is that I assaulted a 10-year-old Dota player at DreamHack. Just
I like the way that one just gets wilder every few months that goes by. Every time it gets told, that one is like one of those fucking stories, like the fish just get bigger and bigger, like.
Yeah, it is.
Because if you remember, there was that one where someone said that you assaulted a 19-year-old Dota player or something.
Yeah.
Isn't he like 28 or something like that?
Yeah. He's like he's not much younger.
Yeah, he's one of the oldest players for sure.
Yeah. So there was that, and of course that's always portrayed as just some outrageous. Like
he was just walking around like.
No, so the version I read most recently as a result of meeting another new community was that basically I had implied heavily that I'd had sex with Loda's girlfriend. Or maybe did.
You made the sign yourself, didn't you?
Yeah. And then when he came over to ask if it was true, I jumped out of the shadows and like put him in like some fucking George St. Pierre special and just took him down and actually choked him to the point of unconsciousness. I actually read that. And I think my other crime, because there was 3. I always forget what the third one is. Oh, being banned from Reddit, of course, as if a corporation choosing to abuse their power to censor somebody is in any way, shape, or form something that I buy into.
My favourite about that is exactly the sort of person who always brings that up. It's exactly the same person who, a day later will be like, "Oh, these bloody mods removed my comment in a totally corrupt use of their power," and then they're like, "But if they've banned someone, it must have been by the book." It's like, come on.
Yeah. So what's interesting about that is obviously, so for a week I've just been getting like very reasonable death threats and threats of assault and this sort of stuff, just reasonable behavior all around. And everybody's listed these 3 crimes, all very real, of course. And then what they always do is they always follow it up with a caveat that, well, even if none of this is true, he's still an asshole. Like, right, well, good to know.
Well, the genius is some of those people do have those sort of philosophies where you can never get them. Like, even if they're like, "You're racist," you'd be like, "Well, I don't say anything racist." Yeah, because you keep it. That's your front, isn't it? Like, fucking hell, I can't win then. By actually not being racist, that's an obvious front that you secretly are. So I'll lose either way.
That's the thing. By leading a life completely free of having done anything or said anything racist at any point in it, it's the perfect front to actually, of course, be racist. So, so it's been a rough all week. So I was actually like, I was thinking to myself, this is how bad it was. I was actually thinking, bloody hell, I wish I was doing by the numbers, where the only thing I had to worry was what the fuck is Thorin gonna say.
Which also could be another name for the show.
Yeah, true. I mean,
the unofficial name.
Narcissist wants top billing, of course. Yeah, we will
featuring Richard Lewis.
Yeah, what the fuck will Thorin say next? Featuring Richard Lewis. Yeah,
formerly of Breitbart. That would be the sickest title ever, wouldn't it? It'd just get all the audience.
Make the graphics, Phil. Make the graphics. No doubt. Now that Sam's big, Sam will probably want a fucking piece of the action now. He'll want billing on there.
He'll be renegotiating his fucking, whatever you call it, like the
stipend. Fine. Right, let's talk about some CS then. I've moaned. I've got it off my chest. I'm all right. Let's do it. Let's get into it. So I want to start with a story because I don't know if you remember the last episode we did. We were talking about the the minor qualifiers, I should say. And one of the teams that qualified was French Canadians. And I just said, I went on a little bit of a tirade saying, fuck everything about this team because they're a bunch of online shitters. And, all of them have been playing like 1 year, 2 years max. No tenure within the pro scene whatsoever. A few people did message me and say, you've been a bit unfair there. People's opinion I respect. Tolkien Fanatic messaged me. He caught me on a bad day. I gave him some short shrift. He probably shouldn't have. But I stand. But I think it was like the 50th. I'd had about 50 threats.
Well, that's also the problem, isn't it, with the
internet? Said this thing
is that we all behave as though we were in the same room, where sometimes I do just wake up and 1 minute after that, I've already seen a social justice warrior tweet, and then I do go to some comment, and it's obviously just like you just unleash on him, don't you? And then you go, I feel a bit better now, right? Breakfast. Yeah. But they don't know that, It might be like fucking 10 at night there or something,
Yeah, he was literally the conversational equivalent of jerking off before you get out of bed. Like, it was just, I just need a release. And he just got the full Monty, and it's fucked up. So, yeah, but anyway, he said, they've had some good results and they've done all right. And it's like, yeah. And they went to Fragadelphia and gave fuck off. Come on. Let's be fucking real. They just beat Immortals. I can't be asked. And then, of course, they backed out and said, due to travel issues, visa issues, a French-Canadian team cannot attend an event in Canada. Reasonable, right? The most absurd thing I've ever heard. Now, apparently, this is because they've got a player called Riova, who I know from other things, not just CS. And he is a Turkish national who lives in the United States. Now, I don't know if you saw the news recently, but I think, again, we alluded to it on the last podcast where Trump had gone off on one of his frothing tirades about, this country probably is not going to give visa shit out until they sort themselves out or whatever. But that wouldn't affect the U.S. national who had valid U.S. paperwork. And apparently the fear is if he goes to Canada across the border, he won't be able to get back in, which is nonsense. It doesn't make sense. That's not how it works. If you've got like I'm here on a visa,
I'm getting suspicious about that story in itself.
So here's the thing. Like I'm looking at this and I've got a visa, right? Now, if I leave the country, I've got a visa. It wouldn't matter if tomorrow.
I mean, that's kind of the point of having a visa.
Yeah. It wouldn't matter if Donald Trump said tomorrow we're not issuing visas to the UK anymore. I've already got one. I'm sound. So I don't understand. And apparently it was intimated on Twitter that he's had legal advice and been advised not to leave. Well, that guy's fucking garbage. Then he's not. Don't know where you found that fuck. Is he called Saul by any chance?
You can't even get a player about to sign like a 300k contract to get 1 hour of a lawyer's time. And this guy for fucking America's Minor was like, "You got to help me, Saul. What do I do? Where do I put the money? Come on."
So I don't buy it at all. I'm basically of the opinion that he's full of shit. That they're all full of shit, and I don't. And
it's worse as it goes on, doesn't it? It's just complete garbage.
And this is a phenomenon that I have noticed. Like more and more of these fucking teams that like have no intention of actually going to the LAN enter qualifiers. And it's become a bit of a fucking pet peeve of mine. In fact, I would like to suggest, and this is just a general conversation before we get into the events that have been happening. I'd like to suggest that if you enter a qualifier and you go all the way through and you qualify for an event and then you no longer attend, all tournament organizers should discount that team from attending qualifiers for a nominal amount of time. Because
some not sort only of system like 2 strikes or something, there's got to be something, right?
Yeah, like not just because you've wasted that tournament's time and then they've got to scramble and get another team in and how are we going to do it? And they get all the hate and the bullshit, the tournament organizer, because it's like, oh, we'll give it to the one who finished in second place. And then they're like, oh, yeah, but they only beat this other team in overtime over there. Like, all this nonsense, right? And then they have to host, sometimes they even have to host another mini qualifier to do it like they did here. This is gibberish. If you enter a fucking qualifier without the good faith of actually being able to attend the event, and let's be clear, this isn't a discovery that Riova just made. Oh, bloody hell, turns out I'm a Turkish national. It's not like he just woke up and fucking discovered that, like in his stocking at the end of the bed. Wait a minute. Like, he knew that going in. So there's no excuse for this. You just wasted everyone's fucking time to get some cheap and fucking tawdry headlines and attention for yourself. And it's fucking bullshit. And teams that do that should be rightly shunned from, being invited to other qualifiers. I think Space Soldiers had to pull out as well of another event that they qualified for recently. And it is just fucking tiresome. It's like you are legitimately robbing every other team that enters into the process of good faith of a chance to qualify by your very attendance. So I'd like to see tournament organizers come together for a change and basically fucking, share notes, shall we say. I'm guessing you agree with that. You're nodding.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to know exactly how you'd implement it. I mean, it's not really something we should have to worry about. I'm sure they can figure out some appropriate punishment, but there definitely should be something in that for like I mean, because the problem is, we're thinking about the worst case scenario where the team fucking qualifies and it doesn't go. But why am I even having to play against teams who could have never gone? Why isn't this?
Yeah.
Think about all the complaints we're having, justifiably so, about these, fucking qualifiers, like 256 teams, and you've never heard of half of them. I think there has to be some sort of a more professional barrier, at least for this, because this is the major. It's one thing if it's a qualifier for some last spot at some massive tournament.
Exactly.
That's a one-off tournament. This is the major though, so I'd hope you could get something in place.
Yeah. So a bit more of a serious story. This is about the sort of incoming, I assume at least, SK Gaming roster change, which is Bolts coming in to kind of replace Phelps. But DK and as it came out, a few other journalists, and now today, Taco confirmed it himself that they're going to use Phelps at the major and at ECS.
Yes.
And Bolts is going to play every other tournament and every other online match for them. So first of all, I wanted to pick your brains and just get some thoughts about Bolts as a replacement for Phelps and what you think of that, because I know in particular you've always been a big proponent of Phelps, always believed that Phelps was like one of the better players out there. When he joined SK, you were like, this is it now, this is like some mad fucking LA Lakers three-peat level of shit, and it hasn't quite worked out or lived up to that billing. So that's number one. And then second of all, being in this weird fucking situation where because of certain rules or certain decisions, you actually have to kind of have this player you don't have a long-term future with, who hasn't been playing particularly well, I would imagine, because of internal friction. And you've got to drag him along to the bigger tournaments out there at the start of 2018.
Yeah, well, the thing is, like, one of the things that I was really impressed by with Fallen and SK this year is that they were able to get all that success in the very middle of the summer with Phelps. Because, like I always stressed, like, it seems weird when you've still got 4 of the same 5 players that you had all your old accomplishments with to be like, they did it in a different way. Because you think to yourself, well, yeah, it's only one player difference. But to me, this was like a massive player difference, because what FNX brought to the team and what Phelps brought to the team were completely different skill sets. And you obviously had to implement them very differently. You couldn't just say to Phelps, play like FNX. It wouldn't work in either respect, And I actually did feel like for a while when they were winning, they did an amazing job of kind of reformulating the team. I mean, we've seen it allowed Fur to come to the forefront and be a superstar at the same time as Cold Zero, which is, I mean, who knew if that would work? Obviously, they hadn't done that in the past, He'd very much given up a lot of his aspects so that Cold Zero could be a star. So I think they did a great job of implementing it. And when it worked, it looked fucking amazing. Like, they looked like they had mad firepower in that team. Because remember, at that point in time, in terms of raw firepower, like, Fallen's like your 4th best fragger. Well, you're gonna have an insane team if that's the case, So they rightly so were a very strong team. Obviously, they missed out on the chance to really cement themselves because they didn't win the major, and then since then they fell off, and it wasn't until now they got Bolts that they kind of returned to championship glory. But I do still think that it was a good move initially to do. I think it was worth a gamble. I think they had a good period. It's just that in the period where they've had all these problems, both Fur and Phelps, I think, have had some real issues at times in matches. Logically, you can't really cut Fur at the moment, I think, and especially as to me, like, I get the feeling for some weird reason in that team that they think of Fur as like some kind of like talismanic figure, Like, I think he's like the real dude or something, who struggled and all this shit. And so for whatever reason, it feels like even if, because for example, people always say that he actually doesn't practice that much. He's not actually that into CS anymore. So I get the feeling that for some reason he does have like a special place in the team where he's treated differently by Cold Zero, by Fallen, etc. And maybe he's not scrutinized as much. So the obvious person I think who was going to get scrutinized was Phelps. He's the only logical one I think you could remove at this point in time. And then even though Bolts obviously has his own storied history with those players, I do think he's the logical person to give a chance to, because first of all, he can kind of play that FNX role of the past. And so you can kind of say, right, let's reformulate again and take in a bit of the old, but then keep Fur as a very good player. And we'll try and mix it up that way, because clearly whatever style they were doing before, somehow it either just wasn't as effective anymore, or people did know how to play against it finally. Because that's an aspect people take for granted as well. When you're coming up with, like, sort of the window in which you have to have your success, SK had a crazy schedule when they had all those successes. Like when they won those 5 out of 6 tournaments, that might have literally been 6 tournaments in like 2.5 months or something, not like that, you know. So when you do that, you better win all those tournaments because you're sort of training all your rivals how to play against you and what works for you. So it's going to be tough for you to continue winning after that. That's why teams don't just win for a whole year in a row. Like, I know people think they do, but every team you think won it for a year in a row didn't. Like, go back. NIP lost eventually. Fnatic lost eventually. No, the great teams bounce back from it, so they win more later. And you think, you know, they still stayed in control, but yeah, I think this SK one's really interesting because I don't blame them for any of these moves. I think all the moves made sense at the time in isolation. I think they've done a pretty good job generally of transitioning between players. And this last one where they've taken in bolts now and obviously instantly won a tournament over real teams, you know, and apparently with very little practice again. Like Fallen has to go down in that respect as one of the best leaders that ever Counter-Strike has ever seen. Because think about how many times he's taken in a player and at the first tournament they do a really good result. That's unheard of, you know. Everyone else has the excuses prepped, don't they? Oh, it's a new lineup, still testing things out. There's never any of that. He just goes in and does well. So, just fantastic job all around, I think.
Yeah, I mean, so it's an interesting one for me. I think this is going to go down as like another missed opportunity for a Brazilian player. Actually, like Phelps, it's crazy how talented he is. But this is the thing: where do you go? You know, right now, do you want to be heading back to Immortals? Probably not. Tempo Storm, I mean, they're never going to do it. That current roster isn't going to do anything on an international scale. Immortals has the name and the pedigree, not the roster now, in my opinion. And unfortunately, if you're a Brazilian talent, SK Gaming's the only show in town, really. Like, what do you do? So Phelps doesn't deserve to be a cast-off, but for whatever reason, he hasn't made it work. And I think he's going to look back and regret that in the same way that all of those guys who were over at, like, the party team or whatever, which is going to go on to become the second best team out of Brazil, just based on talent alone. I think they're going to... I think Phelps will regret it. I really think he will. He's a great talent who's probably going to be consigned to obscurity for the next year at least, unless something radically changes in Immortals or his English is sufficient that he can get into an NA lineup. And I don't know if either of those two things are gonna happen. In regards to bolts, you know, I got to say, fuck Steel's life. I don't know what Steel did in a past life. I have to ask Glenn Hoddle about that one because Steel is like...
Good reference.
Yeah, not bad. Old school, bringing it back. You know, fucking Steel's just looking at like, okay, my roster is really bad now, but at least I've got bolts. At least me and bolts are hanging in there, doing the honourable thing, helping Immortals. And bolts has gone to SK, right? Well, I'm just going to write this note, and hopefully people will. Yeah, it's fucked up. I really feel sorry for him. He's such a nice dude, such a professional. I can rarely think of a situation that's fucked over somebody as hard as Steel got fucked, like through no fault of his own, you know. And I don't blame bolts either, but it's just a shame that there isn't a way for Steel to kind of, obviously there is no way that he can kind of go onto SK and make it work. You know, not good enough as a talent. Obviously, Fallen's always going to be the in-game leader. It's, you know, it just is what it is. And bolt's getting the opportunity again. Like, it ruins Immortals for a long, long time. And it pretty much ruined Steel for a long time. He's got to go down with that ship like a good captain. So it's a tough one for me. Do I think SK Gaming are going to be better? Yes, in terms of results and output. I think Epicenter proved that, which we'll talk about in a moment. But I still don't think Bolts has as high a skill ceiling as Phelps, which is like, it's one of those examples where the kind of the team ends up being better than the sum of its parts in this instance, I think. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, that's the interesting part. Like, I'd actually say, like, because like I said, there was a period when the Phelps lineup and SK did really get cooking and they were fucking amazing. So I can't really say that they like totally underachieved. I do think they were primed to win that major though, and they kind of like, I mean, unfortunately, that's just the way it is. I mean, it's the same in any sport, you know. You can be like the Minnesota Vikings, that team that was like 15-1 or whatever, but they didn't even make the Super Bowl. So unfortunately, even though odds are you probably were the best football team, you weren't on the day you needed to be. So unfortunately, that will forever haunt you. And I think in that sense, yeah, they did underwhelm a little bit. But the difference is that lineup had so much firepower in it, and when it worked, looked amazing. This one, that's why I kind of put in the context of I feel like it'll be a little bit more like the FNX one, because I do think it's going to unleash Fallen a bit more, but I think generally Bolt's job here is what you saw in this tournament and what you've seen in Immortals recently is in no way does he kind of command star presence. He's a soldier. He does his job. He does the things in the background. He covers certain spots. And I actually think if you look at SK as a team, they're a team who really seem to appreciate those sorts of players because people like Fur obviously want to go so ham. People like Fallen want to turn themselves loose and do all these aggressive moves. So you've always got to balance that out somehow, you know. And it obviously is going to be like the part that gets the least praise because you're just going to look at the guy doing all the flashy shit and think, fucking hell, what a monster. But you don't always know that, you know, he feels comfortable doing that or knows he can in this instance because someone's watching an angle or covering a spot further back, you know, in case he dies. So I do feel like I can see since he left how FNX helped out Fallen's style. And I hope that Bolts will bring that. And so in that sense, Bolts doesn't have to be as good as Phelps was. He can perhaps make some of the other players better than they were in the past lineup. I think that would make sense to me.
Yeah. So, Denver. We had an event in Denver, Duncan, DreamHack. This is how far it's been. So I need you to cast your mind back. Now, to be fair, it wasn't a top-tier event in the sense that there was only really Cloud9 out of the sort of top 10 teams in the world that were in attendance. Yes. But that said, there was some other names that are interesting. I want to start just again back with a general conversation about Big. Because you made a tweet at the time, something, I don't know. I always know when it's going to be a good one because you always start it with the word imagine, right? Yeah, it's always.
I'm very much like John Lennon in a way.
Yeah, you certainly are.
But alive.
Right.
And bigger than Jesus and him.
Yeah, for now. On both counts. So Big, right? Like your tweet was something along the lines of imagine thinking Big were a really good team just because they won 3 times on Inferno at a major or something. I think that was your tweet. Words to that effect. Now, the implication being there, you would be an idiot if you think that. Well, I did think that and sort of still do. Okay. But they have fallen off recently. Like going into the major, I think there was a very strong argument to say they were the most improved team in Europe. I really felt that, you know, Next had sort of come alive again. Tabson's proven to me that he has actual star potential, that he could slot into a team and do very well. Like whatever the roster, I think Tabson holds his own. I think you've always been a little bit harsh on Tabson as well. But yeah, they sort of have been a bit underwhelming since the major. And I suppose it does put into context that it was just 3 best-of-1 wins, you know, and then they lost the series. So they went to DreamHack Denver. They didn't seem to get a lot of love from the guys. But I thought they picked up some decent, again, you know, best-of-1 results. I mean, they made short work of NRG. That's nothing to crow about. But they did beat Mouse Sports, and they went all the way to the final. So I guess I got to ask you, you know, do we need to sort of reevaluate Big based on the major? Would you be willing to reevaluate Big based on their performance here, or?
I mean, I don't think the field here is that good. My main problem with Big is this is exactly the sort of tournament that I would expect them to have a good result in. These are like a lot of tier 2 teams that, you know, once upon a time were tier 1, but either aren't now or haven't yet gotten back to that level. So this is actually where I would place them as a team. I would expect they'd be a top 4 team at this tournament. That makes sense to me. My problem with them as a side is this is where when you define certain terms, like you really need to know what someone's definition is, because on the one hand, when I say good team, if you put the emphasis on the word team, yeah, they actually are. Like the team is very functional. You can see how it's designed. All the pieces work together. The problem is when I say good team, I mean like, are you a top 10 team? Are you a team that could actually like win a big tournament? Could you make like the semis of a major, for example? No, in that sense, no, Big could not do that. And I think not only did they show that, even their best ever run, which was the major, but I think if you put you draw an average through all the LAN results they've had, I think they're pretty far from that. So the problem I have with them as a team is I actually think they're a rare example of a team that I actually think is pretty functional. Like all the pieces, if no other teams existed in the world and you showed me this lineup and how it's supposed to work, I'd say this all makes sense. But in the context of what other teams are like in Counter-Strike, especially right now, I think it's almost impossible for this team to do very well. Partly because, as I always go back to, I don't think they have enough firepower in this team. I think that is a real big problem. But their problem is they normally when you don't have enough firepower, it's like you're sort of one position away from the big move that would make you really good. I think this team is, in that sense, is actually lacking on all ends. Like they've done what I think is the critical flaw when you build a team, which is that you don't kind of balance out people's weaknesses. So I always say, if you're going to have like God B, right, I can absolutely get on board with the idea that he's such a good in-game leader. Even if he has tournaments he frags badly, who cares? He's going to do such a great job setting up the rest of the team that we're not actually going to lose because he didn't frag. The problem is you can't have him and Legia at the same time. That's
and I feel like we've been talking about this for a while. The two fundamental problems with Big for me, it's not that Legia doesn't have his great games, because he does. It's that they come round like once in a fucking blue moon. And there's so many moments where you watch him and like he's inconsistent. He'll whiff like unbelievable, like he's in a 1v1 situation, he'll flank, he'll have someone from behind.
His blooper reel is fucking terrible.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you were to, that's a great way to put it. I think if you were to go out there and make a fucking fundamental blooper reel to make somebody look like the worst player who ever played. And I'm not saying Legia is the worst player who ever played, obviously not, but you could make Legia look like that person from his blooper reel, because when he fucks up, it's horrendous. It really is. And I don't know why that is. It's like that, when they talk about intangibles, usually intangibles is a good thing. It suggests a player has like an X factor or something like that. Definitely one of the things that holds Legia back and holds Big back is this intangible around that when he fucks up, and he's good for one cataclysmic fuck up a series. That's the reality. Now, when you throw into that Kiev is a very inconsistent AWPer as well. Those are the problems. Like,
I mean, here's the basic way to say it, Rich, right? Realistically, aside from tabseN and God B, who in their own respective, like, here's the thing. If we were building a team today and we're playing like, Football Manager or whatever, but we're using CS, if we started the team like this, I'm going to have God B as my in-game leader, tabseN as my star player, right? We've got the makings of a good team. The problem is it's like every other position we've compromised that. And every other player in their own unique, context of their role has a flaw. Now, they all have a positive as well, and sometimes it can work. But that flaw, add them all together. You can't have like half the team have critical flaws that can fuck up a game,
Yeah. And that's what I mean. I think those two things are what's holding them back. If Kiev can ever hit like a run of good form, that might unbelievable form, get into that top 5 AWPing contention. I think that would offset Legia's fuck-ups to a certain degree. But I've seen no evidence to suggest it would happen. Now, that being said, my metric of what is a good team is, are you within that top 20? And I think we're at a stage now where we definitely can look beyond the top 10 and find very strong teams that exist outside of it. I think, for example, Fnatic, you would put outside of the top 10. Mouse Sports, who are here, I'd put them outside of the top 10. Optic, firmly outside of the top 10. Renegades coming up, Heroic. These are all teams outside of the top 10 that, to me, are good teams that could go to an international event and have a deep run into a tournament, despite they would be clear underdogs to do so. So I think this is the first time, scene-wise, we can truly say that and it not be hyperbole. And definitely in that regards, I do think Big are a good team. I think, I never had them beat Cloud9.
Thing is, though, I just don't think there's any future there. Like, first of all, they've had this lineup a long time. And secondly, you've kind of seen how high it goes and how low it goes. And it's kind of fairly consistent as to where they're probably going to end relative to the competition in each tournament. So to me, they're a team where, like, I actually think they're a perfect example of exactly who has been victimized by the world in which you get all these multinational teams.
Yeah.
Because right now, there are players who... Otherwise, you would say, why doesn't a team like a Big get something like this? But they can't, because all those players can go to an Optic, a Mouse Sports, so, all these different squads that can get the multinational players. So I feel like, unfortunately, that's why I think they can't get that extra piece or two that they need, Like, if you take this exact team right now, and you take out Kiev and you give them Chris J, who obviously played with God B in the past, and then you take or Alu, another player who's played with God B and absolutely would like to play with him, good AWPers, with international experience. You take out, let's say, you can go either Legia, you want, someone who's a decent enough supportive player, you could get someone like that, or go the other way, say, right, we'll go and replace Nex with, I don't know, Sunny or someone who's on the rise, Now you'd be thinking, hey, now there's some potential for this. This is where it can go. I just don't know where this lineup could go. I feel like I've seen them play all the sorts of matches they're going to play.
Yeah, possibly. Again, and this is what I mean. There are too many variables now to kind of put them over the top and get them knocking on that door to be in the top 10 or top 12, top 15 even. But that, I still think they're a decent team, and if they could fix maybe one of the three obvious glaring flaws, I think that would definitely push them up. Like
that's also the worry, though, for me, is that because I actually do think that Godby's a really smart guy who, in general, knows how to set a team up. I actually think with people like him, okay, I would say the same thing applies, right, to MSL. I think he's another good example, because they actually are so good at identifying like the strengths of the players they're playing with and then setting their team up. They actually don't need as long as other people often. They don't need like 9 months to get a lineup together. In 2 or 3 events, they're going to have the lineup set. They're going to work things in. They're going to have tactics, etc. So the problem is actually you don't really need to give those guys more time. Like Godby's already had them doing all sorts of like innovative smoke strats that no one else had, So if they're not winning tournaments when they've already got all of that on their benefit, and this guy's had all this chance, to figure out how to use everyone, I think odds are there's not much ground left to cover there. He's probably mined all that out in that respect.
So while we're talking about teams coming on the up as well, mousesports, so I was watching some of the analysis there. I think a lot of people kind of felt that the final was likely to be mousesports and Cloud9 rather than Big and Cloud9. And there was certainly an argument for that. But I got to say, ever since they've, and I think it was still a good move, but ever since they brought in Sticko for Dennis, and Sonny's in there, it's really weird. They do seem to have cooled off quite insanely compared to where you felt they were going to be. They discovered ROPS. You're like, wow, okay, this is good. They've found that talent. They've got that firepower. Chris J's in there. He's always solid, can do it all. We were talking about Oscar. Is he better than Guardian? That was a conversation from just 2 months ago, right? So right there, you've got, again, this core team. I think Sticko is an upgrade on Dennis. I think there's fucking players out there, who are nowhere near the pro scene that would have been an upgrade to Dennis, quite frankly. So I am at a loss to explain why mousesports kind of have sort of plateaued. And it comes at a point when you're like, this should be the time where they're having the honeymoon period, everything's clicking, and they're going to evolve and they're going to develop. But outside of like the blowing LDLC out the water, which doesn't fucking impress me at all, because I think LDLC are a bit of a joke team, just in firepower terms, mostly. They just looked a very ordinary side. They looked like they didn't belong at this tournament at all. They got wrecked by Big in the groups. They had that big win against LDLC. And then, although they did take a map off Cloud9, and there was a 16-14 and an overtime in there, that was pretty much like the peak. And there wasn't any one person you could point to and say, they did bad over the course of the tournament. It was rather that at no point did it ever sync up. Like Sonny had a really good series against Cloud9. Rest of the tournament was solidly the worst player. Chris J, up and down. ROPS was ridiculous against LDLC. Not so much in other games when they needed him. So I don't know what's wrong with mousesports. I feel they should be way better than they are.
When I saw this team play at that Mykonos event, where they actually obviously won the tournament and were able to beat Virtus Pro, I think they beat Gambit as well, and then they obviously narrowly beat Team Liquid in the full best of 5. When they were doing that in that tournament, I have to say, like, it looked basically like they were just playing free for all. Like, they didn't look like they actually had any sort of real strats or anything along those lines. And I noticed they won tons of their games on just having like T-sides where everyone just ran out and shot everyone in the head, like, ridiculous stuff that doesn't look like it's some sort of a style. And as a result, you'd logically think didn't have great CT sides because they didn't have all the spots that people should play and the chemistry between them, etc. I still feel like that's actually a general way you can look at this mousesports team. Like, it is just like an FPL mix, isn't it? Like Chris J is supposed to be the in-game leader of this team. Okay, like Sticko at least comes in with sort of a role. Like, he knows he's going to try and play a supportive role. The rest of them, it's just a weird. It's almost like they try to have star players by committee, don't they? They have these like 3 players who would all be a star player at this level in another team. Like you put Rops, Oscar, or Sonny in big, they're a star player with Tabson, one of them, you know. But on this team, they're in this weird side where they're good one game or good one map specifically, you know, and then the other guy good on this other one. It doesn't feel like a very well constructed team. So I actually do feel like they don't accomplish success as a team in that sense. As I don't really know where this lineup goes. It's the same problem I have with that Optic team where I'm a little bit skeptical of them. There's no in-game leader. Like people forget, the last couple of phase lineups have had like, you know, a bunch of really skilled star players. They all had Carrigan as well, though. I remember them when they didn't have Carrigan. And guess what? It was kind of a bit depressing, wasn't it? Where they'd have Jacob and they'd have AZ and they'd have Rain. You'd be like, so what's, and Kiyashima, and then you could never get out of a group. So I think what we've learned, I mean, it's funny, in the last year or so, I do feel like the in-game leader has gone back to being one of the most fucking valuable roles in the entire game. And you look at teams that don't have them, and it's the first obvious thing you say, isn't it? Because it makes everything else better because sometimes I think the big problem for me is there's a type of player, and admittedly, Mouse has a lot of them because they have a bunch of young players who haven't played that long. Sometimes that's the sort of player who, if left to his own devices, won't figure out the right role. You know, either too arrogant and they want to do a role they can't do, or sometimes you get players where bizarrely they're like not confident enough and they think, oh, I'll just do this role over here. And the leader would go, no, I'm going to put you over here and you're going to be like a key part of my offense. And then they shine, you know. So I think there's just all sorts of problems in Mouse. I don't expect him to do much, but I would expect this to continue up and down at events, you know.
I mean, you were at Mykonos, which they won. This is when I thought, I mean, sure, I don't put too much stock in that tournament because I know from talking to players, everybody treated that as kind of a holiday and a way to relax. That it just so happened to have a tournament. It was like an old school LAN in that sense. But I still thought they had to come through a pretty tough field. Sure, yeah. And I felt they were actually going to go places after that. So, I mean, you were obviously at the event. Do you have any insight as to why that might, you know, why it might be a little bit?
Like, I have to say, legitimately, almost every big match that I think they won, I did predict the other team to win. And this is one of the reasons why, because when you watched them play, it looked so much like they were playing free-for-all Counter-Strike that you just kept thinking, right, well, when's this going to end? Like, when's it going to stop working? It's kind of like in FaZe. Like, FaZe is obviously a much less extreme version of it because they have Carrigan and they do have a bunch of players where you know they'll figure it out eventually. But when FaZe was just winning all these events without losing a single map ever, no, I didn't think that was going to continue. Yes, I did continually doubt and go, well, no, listen, let's not get silly. They haven't solved Counter-Strike. Someone is going to beat them. In the same sense, I kept watching all those wins Mouse had and going like, this is going to end soon. Like, how the fuck are they winning all these games, you know, sooner or later? But it just so happened at that tournament, they hit a nice little streak. I mean, admittedly, you look at the opponents they played. Gambit's still a very new lineup with the Fitch guy in the lineup. They lost very narrowly to them. Then they had Virtus Pro, who was in really bad form at the time. And by the way, Virtus Pro still gave him a good game. And then you have in the final, Team Liquid, I have to say, I think choked a little bit in that series. And then they had the problem with Zeus having to leave on the second to last match. You know, there's a bunch of reasons why in all these matches, it also could have definitely gone the other way. So I don't feel as though they were dominant. In that sense, they were already on like the razor's edge, as it were. So I just feel like this is a team where in an era where there's so many good teams, I don't really see how this team stands out. You know, it's got some good players. I can see why they went for it, but they're clearly a few pieces away. And for me, one of them is in-game leader.
Yeah. Who could they possibly get?
Well, that's the sad thing, isn't it? This is in a world where we didn't know anything about how player relationships work. This is exactly the sort of team you'd want a GOB to join, right?
Well, yeah.
A team like this be fantastic, wouldn't it? Think of all the things he could do.
I think there'd be some. Well, I mean, I guess there's none of the remaining players, isn't there anymore?
They're all gone.
Chris J.
I bet Chris J.
was a lifer at Mouse Sports.
Yeah, you have to understand. Chris J. is just. He's the guy where when someone comes into prison and they go on the yard and they beat up the hardest guy just to make sure no one fucks with them, Chris J is the first person who joins us there, like right-hand henchman. That's Chris J.
So we'll talk about Cloud9 just a second, though, because I always love addressing idiots in the chat. Okay. So there's a guy in there, right? Like, you just listen to my conversation there.
Yeah.
You just listen to what I said, the words coming out my mouth, right? Did I say Rops was bad against Cloud9? I didn't, did I? I said he was. I said he was really good against LDLC, and that was like his best fucking series, right? Well, statistically, right, that's inarguable, right? So I got the numbers in front of me. I was just bringing them up because this guy is just fucking so out of it. I'm not even going to name him because I think he accepts that he's just an idiot, which is fine. If you're willing to accept you're an idiot, that works for me. So Rops did drop 80 frags, right, against Cloud9, but that was over 3 maps, one of which was an overtime, right? The other of which was a 16-14, right? In the game against LDLC, right? Hang on, let me bring that up. Let me just find it. Where's that series? LDLC. So in the series against LDLC, he dropped 50 frags in 2 maps, which had 18 rounds in the first and 20 rounds in the second. Yeah. So 50 frags over 38, as opposed to 80 frags over probably like 80 rounds or something, right? Well, no, not 80 rounds, but you know what I mean.
By the way, another factor I forgot to mention as well, if you just look at the lineup of Mouse Sports, is they're a lineup where I actually think that the name value of some of the players, as bizarre as it might sound, just because of the last few months, is in a way higher than the actual what you should expect from them. Because, for example, in isolation, Oscar, Rops, Sonny are all good players. The problem is they're all actually pretty inexperienced players. Like Oscar, obviously, we all know that story where he was around like the sub-top scene of European Counter-Strike. He was never on a top team. He has actually never played for a world-class team and been, super deep in tournaments and whatnot. Basically, Mykonos was his first big run, even at that level of tournament. Then you look at Sonny, the guy's fresh out of the scene. He's just made his name in Penta, which was not a team that everyone was looking at like, wow, what a team's going to play. If anything, overachieved in that team. Then you go and look at Robs. As I always mention with Robs, he is brand new. This is his first ever competitive team. So that's also the reason why I feel like this team really needs an in-game leader. Because you need someone to kind of, again, figure out what these guys are going to do and steer them the right way. Because none of them are experienced in the sense of being where they want to be now. Like they've all been at this level, except Robs, but none of them have been any higher. So, there's a reason why veterans, nearly every top team has at least 1 or 2 veterans in.
Mm. Yeah, and like you say, when you are a young player coming through, you definitely need that experience, and you need people that can lead from the front. I guess it is a leadership issue that Mouse Sports have, but I don't know how you could practically fix that, right?
Like I actually think a good analogy would be the old Immortals lineup. Remember the first Immortals lineup, the one that was with where it had Phelps and it had Bolts. Who was the 5th one? Oh, it was the Showtime guy originally.
Yeah, Showtime.
Right. If you remember that lineup, for sure, you had moments where there were flashes where you're like, fucking hell, this team could be really good. But again, those were players who had no experience of playing at a higher level. Like, they basically, Bolts was it. They had Bolts because they didn't have Steel back then. So people like Henny, Phelps, they were mad talented, but they could never do anything on the top level, and they didn't necessarily know how to play on that level. So I don't think it's a coincidence that you brought in people like Steel, and they started to gradually get it together and started to fix it, etc. And then even when you bring in someone like KNG, who's new to the top scene, there's a core there of Bolts, of Steel. Now the others have got experience under their belts. I think there's a reason why that team eventually blossomed.
So here you go. You can roast a fan now. I've roasted a fan. You can roast a fan in the chat, and then we'll talk about Cloud9. There's a guy called Rabe. I don't know if you ever browse the fucking Global Offensive subreddit, right? Well, he posts a lot. He posts some of the most stupid shit I've ever seen. Him and that Radiant Sun guy are like fucking tied for just ridiculous shit. So he's in the chat, and he said, "Wait, Duncan said that Oscar is inexperienced." Of course, I know. You did say, first of all, at top level tournaments, crucial caveat there, and that's inarguably true. Do you want to explain why that's true?
Well, that would be like if you said that, like, someone who just become a porn star is inexperienced. You're like, well, that's not true. I know you had a girlfriend for 10 years. Like, what would the relevance be, though? It's can you perform in porn films, isn't it? So it doesn't make any sense in that context. Oscar has never been to deep finishes like semis and finals in big tournaments featuring SK Gaming, Virtus Pro, etc., except until Mykonos. Therefore, he is inexperienced.
There we go. Thanks.
Isn't it amazing that? Here's the mad thing, Rich. I actually don't mind. Like, I have no problem, by the way, if someone says that they totally disagree with my opinion or my conclusion was entirely wrong. That's entirely someone else's prerogative. And you can definitely be an intelligent person who can think for themselves and disagree. But it's when people fail to even get the facts correctly, but in a scenario where I presented the facts and they have misheard. Like in that scenario, there's only one malfunction in this circuit, and it is your motherfucking broken brain. So do something about it. Either go, get lessons, or just get a hammer. Someone's got to fix it.
I just had an argument like that on Twitter with some guy, dude.
Mental, isn't it?
Like some guy who lectures journalism, and he was trying to tell me like, why don't he was asking like, why don't people in the audience like reporting or opinion pieces when both of these things have so much worth? So I shared some of my wisdom. 12 years doing it. 12 years of audience reactions, always the same, been the same for 12 years, no matter which game I write about, always the same. If you report and use an unnamed source, it's a lie. If you write an opinion piece, it's biased, which is, of course, an absurd argument because it's biased towards your opinion. That's what makes it an opinion piece. Now, I explained that to him, saying I don't think the audience that you write for in esports generally gets some of the core concepts of journalism. He ignores that. Ignores my 12 years experience and then just argues about something I didn't say repeatedly, endlessly. And then when you go, yeah, I'm just bored of this now, mate. How rude. Like, fuck off. I've got better things to do than listen to you fucking bang on about it. I don't get why people can't debate what you say. Why do they have to debate the thing they wish you said? Because they were prepared for that. It's like if you pre-wrote all your homework without knowing what it was and tried to hand it into a teacher. So, have you written your essay about ancient Rome? Well, my assumption was you were really going to be teaching us about the Greeks. So here's something about Athens. You know, like the teacher would tear it up, and you would be held back many years for being a fucking idiot, which you clearly are. So anyway, Cloud9, right? They won Denver. They won the event, and I think this is what they needed because obviously we've got a wager going. So this is since we made that wager, it's Cloud9's first event in the bag. Big trophy, beat that amazing all-star international field at DreamHack Denver. And go on Cloud9, clearly better than Team Liquid. Richard Lewis was right all along. But they actually did look really good. I mean, it was a pretty imperious march towards the final, the Mouse Sports kind of series notwithstanding. When they got to the final, there was no nerves. They made short work of Big. It was pretty one-sided. Cash sure was a little bit competitive in the sense that it was a close scoreline, although Big did come back into it from what I remember. But then when they got to train, I was really surprised that was in the veto. Like I thought that might have got removed by Big, but they didn't. Cloud9 play a lot of train, looked very competent on it, and they beasted Big and looked very good doing so. And I felt they were clearly the best team there at Denver. So is this the launching pad, Duncan? Is this the accelerator to Richard Lewis winning a wager, unlike FaZe Virtus Pro, which happened 18 months too late?
The problem is, if you look at this field, logically Cloud9 should win it. So I don't really know, because here's the thing. Yeah, you're right. In the final, they were comfortably better than Big, but then they had obviously a bit of a hair raiser against Mouse. So I don't really know yet, because the thing is, I still have some concerns about Cloud9. I do actually think they're a pretty good team. I think half the problem with the Cloud9 discussion is it is already, without them even having done anything special, it's already degenerated into some garbage like Kobe versus LeBron thing where you're only allowed to like one and must think the other is absolutely terrible. Right? Both Cloud9 and Team Liquid are clearly good teams.
Sure.
Both, by the looks of it, will end up being some of the best NA teams we've ever had. And so to me, in both cases, I just want to see the next test, and I want to see them at the next big tournament. I want to see how they do against the next big, for example, like I've seen with Team Liquid, I want to see what happens when Cloud9 plays against SK Gaming or Astralis, and we already saw them against Astralis at E-League Premier, but, I want to see the next time they play, because at the moment, both teams, I think, are stuck in the same spot, which is they've had some good results and they've had some good performances, but you can't keep going on forever. Like, do you see, I'm almost close to winning these against these teams. Like, that's the excuse North was giving us for a year. Like, it's not, here's the thing, it is a rung up the ladder. It's hard to always be close with these really amazing teams, but you got to break through and win eventually if you ever want to be considered one of their peers. Otherwise you are just that team that comes close to it and never breaks through. So I think both of them still have to prove something in that respect.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to when
I also want them to play each other. Yeah, let's have a play on one. Right?
And in this regard, I will give you, I think stylistically, I think Team Liquid will eat Cloud9 for fucking breakfast every time they play. I think that's just the reality of the matchup. It's cerebral versus visceral, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like, Team Liquid's methodology is completely different at Cloud. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to when they play each other, because I think that's going to give us a better sort of measure. Now that Cloud9, like, there's no more bullshit now. You've proven you can win like a tier 2 tournament. So it's what you got to pony up and do it at the tier 1.
Well, here's the funny thing, Rich. I actually think if you look at it, like, obviously the way all the moves went down, very convoluted, and then Team Liquid did this weird set of role swaps that actually made them very good instead of kind of underwhelming. If you actually look at it, the simplest way to describe it to someone was last year we had these 3 teams that were all good in their own ways, but also quite flawed. So we had Team Liquid, Cloud9, and Optic. And what you basically did was take Optic, crack it in half, split it between the other 2, and just make the other 2 stronger. And so you've actually condensed the 3 teams into 2, and now we have 2 very good teams who also are a clear step above all the other teams from that region. Like if CLG is indeed the 3rd best team from that region, who gives a fuck? Like you weren't close to catching second, put it that way.
Yeah.
But I think that's good for NA though, to have 2 proper teams though.
Oh, it's been so long. I don't even know if in CSGO really we've ever sort of said that, have we?
Well, here's what's mad. Think about this,
honestly.
Rich. Right now, you could actually make a case that NA has 2 teams who are better than the best Swedish team.
I don't even think that's
pretty mad, right?
Yeah, I don't even think that's a controversial thing to say.
Think about what a position that is in history.
Yeah, I mean, the best Swedish team is
probably Fnatic, I'd assume, maybe
or NIP. Yeah, I'd say NIP. So, I mean, if you would have put them in
right?
Yeah, as things stand, if you would have put Liquid in a series against NIP, I'd back Liquid. Cloud9, maybe a coin flip, obviously to my inherent bias and this wager and how desperately I need to win it. I'd probably say Cloud9 all day.
Sorry, we can do it,
Yeah, bloody, it's all about Cloud9, yeah.
If you're listening, lads, keep it up, keep knees up high when you're running, just like Uncle Rich tells you to.
But yeah, mate, honestly, I don't even know what the fuck happened to Swedish CS. It's mental. Yeah, it's like I've never seen a drop off like that. But yeah, I think what was a major part for Cloud9 starting to be competitive and actually like doing well at Denver was early on in the tournament. Rush had like a really like tough time. He was like Rush is the player that's been underwhelming like in Cloud9. Like he knows it. But he actually was able, sort of in the later stages, even when he was having like slow starts, he was able to get his kills up, able to sort of contribute in other ways. And I think he's become a more rounded player, a bit more mentally resilient, even though he's not as explosive. And honestly, I think Rush is probably going to have to understand that he's going to be like not even second fiddle in that team. It's about Stewie. It's about Stewie and Automatic. This isn't like Optic, where pretty much everything's on you, maybe NAF to a certain degree, Mixwell, I suppose. This is, but clearly Rush was the star of that Optic team for me, at least. In Cloud9, I don't know if that's true. I think if you shackle Stewie, that's a bad thing. I think Automatic is, again, just a really explosive player in the way Rush kind of used to be. And this is what happens sometimes. You go to a new team, you get a new in-game leader, all of a sudden you don't get the roles you want, the positions you want, you don't get the play style you want. You maybe don't even play the maps you want because collectively the team has a different philosophy, a different map pool, and you've got to fucking suck it up and adapt. And I think it's a testament when star players actually can do that. When somebody can go from being the number 1 in a team to the number 3 in a team, do it quietly, no complaints, still get enough frags and still help the team along. I think that's a real testament. I think that's like a higher accolade almost than just I was the star in every team I went to. So that for me is going to be the measure of whether or not Cloud9 can sort of surpass Team Liquid as the number 1 team in America. It's going to be, a lot of it is going to be about Rush and him adapting to this new role. So, right. So that was Denver. Now we get to talk about Epicenter, which was a great fucking tournament. Comes in right at the end of 2017. $500,000 up for fucking grabs. It's in Russia, St. Petersburg. If we're to believe the press, along with most of the Trump administration, and it was a fucking banger. Like just all the games. Like I watched. I was getting up like super fucking early to watch this. Like all the games were good. I can't really think of anything that was pretty like underwhelming, that was bad. You know, there wasn't one like standout game that bored me, compelling storylines. And then we get right the way through the best final probably since the E-League major, and a best of 5. We'll talk about that. But let's just start sort of with some of the teams that went there and underperformed. Most notably, I would say, we've just talked a little bit about them. So Liquid, they were in Group B. I thought Group B was the easier group of the two, having North, Astralis, and G2. I thought Liquid could have kind of got something going, like maybe a few upsets. I always feel that, you know, Astralis are there for the taking, although they have had a bit of a resurgence. I think G2 are inconsistent. You know, we all same for North. Yet Team Liquid weren't able to get a win. So just some thoughts about that. I don't know if you actually watched the games. I'm guessing you did, right?
Yeah, I watched most of them. I actually think Group B on paper was the stronger one, because you have to realize coming in, obviously SK had a stand-in. You never know how it's going to go. Could have shit the bed.
True.
VP was considered terrible. Gambit has obviously kind of not been as impressive recently as they first started out with Fitch. So for me, yeah, FaZe going in there makes it strong. But I thought actually that was the group where you figure FaZe are a lock for number 1 in there, you know. So in Group B, the key thing for me here is I actually expected this group would have really good parity. Like in theory, all 4 of these teams can all get wins against, you know, at least 2 of the other 3 teams you'd figure, just maybe a different one for each, you know. So the way it played out was quite surprising. Like I'm really shocked. Probably the one match that really, really shocked me in this tournament, because obviously, like, yeah, VP getting some upsets was crazy, but the way that North got destroyed by G2 was fucking really shocking, because obviously G2 came in as a team where I think everyone's given up on them at this point. Especially when we heard all that shit, like they're not doing proper saves and they're just going to force by all game long. You think to yourself, right, we'll just write this team off then, because we've seen how good that can go and how bad it can go. But in this group stage, it was flawless. And against North, the reason I'm so shocked is you can beat North, yes, and it happens many, many times, but they are usually one of those teams who will always get like 10 rounds in a, you know. They'll grind away. They only play maps they're good at. You know, in this particular series, when they play against the G2, they played Mirage and Nuke. Those are 2 of North's favorite maps. You know, you would expect this would be competitive. So I think North was actually one of the most underwhelming teams in the tournament for me, because I really thought they should have had a chance to get out of this group. I actually think Team Liquid, this will sound weird because they didn't win any series, but I thought they did a decent enough job. It's just that it's kind of like what I said before about them and Cloud9. Like, yeah, they looked very solid. They still did a good job. Most players in the team, looked like they are still good players. But I have to say, like, there's no more get out of jail free cards. Like, at this point, yeah, it's great to have a close series and lose, but you have to start winning some of these series. Otherwise, guess what? You aren't a top team. You're a team just outside of the top tier, which is what would happen, you know. So right now, the problem is the more of these that they kind of bleed away, like E-League, they didn't get to the playoffs, didn't get to the playoffs here. It gets to the point where now no one really can say you're a contender for the event. Now you're a team who has a chance to compete with the teams, but you're not really going to win the tournament, are you? So I hope that this is like the last of sort of the moral victories that you lose, and they're going to actually come and win a big tournament or do a deep finish, because yeah, you were in a hard group, but you've got the top teams. That's why you're called the best teams. You do get out of hard groups. You get out of any group, you know, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and you know, I think with the context of the fucking North result against G2, I think they were there for the take, and I think there's something up with North at the moment. It's so typical of an MSL team. What MSL teams do is they climb the fucking mountain, right? Like, name the mountain, whatever the mountain is. The mountain might be getting into the top 10, might be getting into the top 5. It might be winning their first tournament. It might be being the best team in Denmark, right? And as soon as they get there, as soon as they just fucking, right, throw me down the hill, Sherpas, I'm out. I've done it now. They just seem to have this mad tail off, and they've done it historically. And I don't know what it is. And there's something not like. This tournament was absolutely shocking for North. I mean, that result against G2, I would struggle to think of a more one-sided series between 2 top 5 teams ever. Like, usually when the top 5 play, people will tell you the current state of Counter-Strike right now, it's a coin toss. It can go either way. Everyone says it. All the pros say it. Nobody goes into those games thinking, right, we're going to have an easy time of it. I'm talking about LAN. Obviously, I'm not talking about online CS, which is a fucking shit show. I'm talking about LAN tournaments between 2 top 5 teams. You never see them get fucking blown out on 2 maps. You get 5 rounds in 2 maps as a top 5 team, dear. Fuck that noise. That's ridiculous. That's so unbelievably poor. And it doesn't matter how much you might want to buy into this. Oh, G2 Resurgent, Kenny S, Shocks, all of this like hyperbole you can spit about the French, who were very good at this tournament, no doubt about it. That's just an abysmal performance. That's just like such a bad showing by North, where it's like one of those rare examples where no one shows up. So I don't know. Like I agree with you. I think it was the most shocking result. It's one of the most shocking series I've seen in a long time. Like especially on Mirage, where they just seem to fucking give up, and it's your map pick. You know, it was wild. So Liquid and North finishing down that. I think Liquid will kick themselves because sure you're playing Astralis, good run of form right now. Definitely a team that I've been wrong about in terms of writing them off. But what G2 did to North. Liquid must have been watching that thinking, how the fuck did we lose to these guys? You know, so shocking performance by both of those. Then you had the other big results. I'm trying to just pick some out, which I think are worth talking about. So next,
FaZe one's got to be right.
Well, yeah, you're right. So I was going to talk a little bit about Gambit, but let's jump on to FaZe. FaZe. Obviously, we talked a lot about, are we going to see an era? You know, they won E-League, proven themselves to be this amazing team, super all-star lineup, went to Epicenter and actually kind of fell a little bit flat. Now, sure, I thought they had some pretty competitive series, like the Gambit one had, you know, two overtimes in it, like back and forth. Gambit can probably make a case to say they were unlucky about it, but FaZe came out on top, and I was like, well, that's going to happen sometimes. Then they had that 2-1 series against SK Gaming, which, you know, it was pretty wild in the sense that FaZe dominated SK on the first map, Inferno, which I think is probably FaZe's best map right now, and certainly SK Gaming are absolutely fucking terrible on Inferno. I do not know how they keep letting it through. They got to get a handle on Nuke, in my opinion, because they're just awful on Inferno. But whatever. And then to bounce back, wreck them on Overpass, wreck them on Mirage, unbelievable. But then you're like, all right, you know, that can happen. SK Gaming season champs. I guess the one you've really got to point to was Virtus Pro, who were just leading this like charmed life. And in particular on Inferno, FaZe had so many chances to win that map and sort of capitulated, lost so many rounds, made so many easy mistakes on like after plant positions, fucked up so many clutches with like little inexplicable mistakes. I'm inclined to say that FaZe disappointed at this event, but I don't read too much into it into a broader context. I think this was like one of those anomalies and aberrations, and I think FaZe will like next tournament, it'll be business as usual. I think FaZe will be back to being the number 1 team.
I also just think, like I said, I mean, yeah, I think they should be number 1 and they absolutely should have gone further in this tournament. But they also, it's ridiculous to think they could have continued what they did those last tournaments, like every tournament. I don't just mean even like, no, not losing a map. Like people like Rain were putting up like cold 0 numbers, but in the same team as Nico and Guardian, who were also superstar, you know, like the idea that was just going to keep going and never kind of have any drop off. No, a bit unrealistic. You have to say,
well, to be fair, he did say, I mean, I don't know, obviously we can never verify this when players say this, but, you know, Rain was meant to be sick going into that tournament. And honestly, I can buy that. You know, he's not the kind of player to make excuses and whine. Equally as well, if you think about the travel regime that FaZe has been going through, you know yourself, you're going through airports all the time. Even if you're fucking living like a fucking, you know, Buddhist monk, like healthy lifestyle, you get sick just to travel. It wears you down. Recycled air on airplanes, lack of sleep, different time zones. So I don't want to criticize Rain too much, but yeah, just throwing that out there. Sorry to interrupt you, but you know, Rain did say he was ill. So
like generally, I thought this was still acceptable because, you know, like Like, obviously, VP and FaZe, I mean, when you look at those two, okay, the VP and the Gambit series, I feel like you have to kind of just take both those. Because on the one hand, you could have lost to Gambit. Those maps were very much a good test. So, yeah, I agree. You could have beat VP, but, whatever. You win one, you lose one. Seems like that evened out. The SK one was the really shocking one because, as you said, they were really good on Inferno. And then they got smashed on the other two. And those were literally their 3 best maps. They had their 3 best maps in the series. And this is a classic example, by the way. Here's how you really know, Richard. The people who are like not just annoying fanboys, but the ones who are legitimately ignorant. Because it's one thing, right, if they get mad at me and they try and come at me, right? Because obviously my persona is I rile these people up and I fuck with them, etc. But at the end of the day, right, if you're going to critique like Yanko and say he knows nothing about the game and that by saying that FaZe won the veto, he's an idiot. At this point in time, you are just proposing that there's only one person in the world knows everything about Counter-Strike, and it is you, a random fan with no qualifications or outlet to prove it, except just to say that Yanko's wrong. Like every analyst would have agreed this veto could not have gone better for FaZe. Yeah. It's the dream veto. Remember, these were the 3 maps they came into the tournament undefeated on. So this was a dream. And when you win Inferno right at the offset, you think we're definitely winning this series. So to me, this is the one where I want all the people who do the deep VOD analysis, etc. This is the one you really got to pick apart. Because you got to find out what happened on these Overpass and Mirage games. Because I've seen FaZe play Overpass and Mirage and look absolutely fantastic. And I realize you can point to some things like, yes, coldzera and Fer were amazing on Overpass. Yes, Fer does it all the time. There's actually a famous trend where Karrigan's lost every Overpass game he's played against Fallen teams, believe it or not.
Yeah.
But it's got to be more than that. It's not like that storyline alone made NiKo, who wasn't involved in some of those games, not be able to dominate the game. So I don't know what it is that there is. That's the real match, I think, where the secret to how someone's going to beat FaZe, not just once, will come from. Because SK shouldn't have been the team to do it. They were the team that had the stand-in and had a guy coming in who's replacing someone who's been there for all these months and hasn't played with some of them for years. So I don't really write off FaZe from this one. It does underwhelm me a bit they didn't get to the playoffs. I'd like to see what they would have done against someone from Group B. I think they could have gone to the finals. I think that would have been a straight fire final as well as gave us FaZe. But I think up and down, put it this way, this was probably overall a bad event for FaZe. So if anything, that shows a pretty fucking sick team.
Yeah, and look, I got to give SK Gaming credit. The Overpass win, like you say, as soon as I saw Inferno go through, and then it was into Overpass, which SK picked, I was like Yanko, I was like, well, that's it. They're actually going to do it in 2, because the record that FaZe had on Overpass going into it at LAN was something like 14-2. Yeah. It was fucking crazy. And you were like SK Gaming with a stand-in on a complex map like Overpass, even though, Fallen's had that streak against him, and SK historically have always been good on that. You think about other events where Virtus.pro were able to beat SK on Overpass at a time when SK were the dominant force on that map. You would say SK or Astralis. They were weak there against the very best. And I just felt this was going to be a 2-0. Didn't happen like that. And in fact, they got absolutely fucking smashed. And it was there, I think. They definitely carried that onto Mirage, which was always going to be the coin toss map. But as you said, still a good one for FaZe. But SK Gaming, of course, no slouches on it neither. Had some very, very good results. So, yeah, you're definitely right. The Overpass map for me was what's really perplexing. And it was hard from watching it to sort of really figure out where the breakdown was, why SK Gaming were able to just sort of dominate them in pretty much every execute, every duel that they took. I mean, obviously coldzera. I do want to bring this up. coldzera for me is outside of 2015 Olofmeister, I don't think there's ever been a higher ceiling overall in terms of just consistency and performance. I remember we did a show on E-League actually where we were talking about best players in the world, and coldzera was kind of a footnote in it. I was trying to bring him up, but I think there's no doubt now. He's done it for 2 fucking years solidly, just an unbelievable player. And for me, maybe they didn't need him to go off the way he did on Overpass, but fucking hell, it just sets you up, man. He was just unstoppable, literally. So, a very weird one. I don't even know how you pinpoint that. If anyone watching a demo Like, let's say you had to play phase and you've got that overpass demo, and you're like, "This is it. This is the gold, right? We'll be able to figure out all of phase's weaknesses." I don't think you can, because you will not be playing with Cold Zero. You will not be playing with Fur. You know.
I mean, that is actually definitely a factor that people didn't stop and think about. Okay, so what's funny is we did a counterpoints not long before this epicenter where we had Zeus as the guest. As in Zeus, the Brazilian guy who used to be the coach of SK, is now the Team Liquid coach, not the Ukrainian guy, obviously. And the whole concept of it was like sort of who could beat FaZe, how can you beat FaZe, you know? And one of the things we were all in agreement on, which I know a lot of fans were like, what? Was that actually the team that we would pick as the one most likely to beat FaZe was SK. And what's funny is, to a fan, this is where fans really don't understand the game. A lot of fans really do think that you're like placing in, as in where you'd be ranked in the world, means that like if you're the second best team, you would always beat every team that's third, fourth, fifth, seventh. Well, no sport or competitive discipline ever will work like that. And in fact, usually that's why it's very rare that you get that one team that truly dominates and, you know, not only wins all the tournaments, but sort of can never be beaten by another team. Because even when SK was winning everything this summer, they had that bizarre matchup where somehow G2 would just beat him every time, and yet G2 wasn't winning all the tournaments, you know. So in that sense, right, yeah, I get that SK coming into this tournament wasn't in great form. They kept getting beaten by like Team Liquid, by a bunch of different teams, you know, where you'd think, how the fuck are they losing to them? But the difference is, like, if I even was to stop and think about the sort of teams that Cold Zero does the best against, right? If you think of his like slow, methodical playing style, he is at his best actually when people might make like individual mistakes against him, because every time he's just going to be that's why we nickname him the Terminator. You know, he just takes advantage of that little mistake. He punishes that little mistake. He punishes the next little mistake, and so that's why he's so tough to play against. And in my opinion, it's no coincidence that the team that has had the most success against Cold Zero is Astralis, because they play the most disciplined Counter-Strike where you play like two-man units, and you're always, if I peek out, it's because this guy's going to flash for me, and then if I pull back, it's because this guy's there to cover me, you know. That sort of play is actually what neutralizes Cold Zero. And by the way, he's still so good, he might win the game anyway. But if you put a team like a FaZe where a lot of them are going to make all these individual plays, first of all, you might have the only player in the server who could be better than anyone on their team. That's a fucking great head start. Like you say, and no one else can sort of repeat step one of that, which is have Cold Zero. And then two, in theory, Cold Zero should do very well against those sorts of players, because you've got so many star players who are used to making all these individual moves that he can punish them but not get punished back. No one's trading Cold Zero back, right? But I don't know what the stats would be on this, but I would assume if you ever looked up in history who the star player who gets traded the least, it's got to be Cold Zero, surely. You just think of his style of play. So in theory, he is the player who should do the best against FaZe. And SK generally are a team that are trained to almost handle a team like FaZe, I think.
Yeah, you know, and SK had this great run through the tournament. We'll talk a little bit just about some of the other teams in it, and then we'll get to that final, which is the big fucking talking point, because it was baller as fuck. So Astralis, SK Gaming were able to overcome them as well, which is interesting because obviously it was the point you just made, you know, about Astralis having this methodical style. They definitely didn't neutralize Cold Zero in that series, which was 2-0. And yes, again, it had an overtime in it on Mirage. I don't think SK Gaming dropped the Mirage that tournament, but I can't remember one. But anyway, Cold Zero again, like top fragged, even against Astralis, and it wasn't that Astralis were bad. It was just that they just sort of weren't quite good enough. They were just that little bit lacking, that little bit of edge. There was like 1 or 2 rounds, certainly on Mirage, certainly. And yeah, it's true for trainers as well. I can think of a few clutches that didn't quite go their way, and that pretty much decided it. But that on top of a dominant performance by Cold Zero. And what makes it all the more remarkable for SK Gaming is understand they're bedding in a new player through all of this.
Yeah.
Like they've literally had to take a player whose play style is completely not analogous. Like you cannot compare it in any way to how Phelps plays.
Yes.
Right. and yet you're betting him into a lineup. And from what I could tell, it was a like for like swap pretty much. Like Bolts played the spots Phelps played, but with a completely different play style. And it worked. And they were able to overcome, like, you know, like I say, they manhandled FaZe. They comfortably beat Astralis. You know, these are like, it's a ridiculous tournament run that they had to go all the way through and win it. Like, it's insane. If anything, this could be the best thing they've achieved since like their last major win. You know, like it's fucking unbelievable. And I thought the series against Astralis, that was when because I was always thinking, like, throughout the tournament, every time SK Gaming won, I was like, right, well, that's that. Beaten FaZe was their final. But when I saw them beat Astralis in the way they did, I was like, okay, yeah, I think they're going to win the whole thing now. Yeah, I was thinking it was going to be VP. I was buying the ES Force conspiracy theories in my brain, you know. But it was SK Gaming. So the Astralis match was really, really good and kind of highlighted a little bit of what you said. But I think it's that was a remarkable win. That for me is where SK Gaming won the event.
And I have to say that semi-final for me is one of the rare instances where I will actually say I think Device was a massive reason why Astralis lost that series. Because these are two of the maps that are absolutely, he is at his best normally with his AWPing. Like on Train, he dominates the CT side of that map. And on Mirage, that has statistically been his best AWPing map. And first of all, on Train, he was all right, but he was neutralized to some degree. I've noticed that. That's the reason why I feel like Astralis went away from Train earlier in the year, because teams could somehow neutralize Device a little bit. Like, you can't stop him entirely because he's a very good player, but you can certainly stop him wrecking your team. You know, you can push him back. He's a quite defensive AWPer at times. And then Mirage, that one he just didn't show up on. He was really bad on that game, I thought. And when you consider it was a close game, like, listen, I'm not saying he should have won Train, but you get to a third map. Now you're all over. I mean, let me have a look. What was it? Would have been Overpass was the third map. So that would certainly be an interesting game to be played. You have your chances there. So fantastic by SK, obviously. But I do feel like, I mean, the most obvious person for me who didn't show up was Device in that series. I think he let his team down a little bit.
Yeah, you know, and again, like I say, I think it was one of those things that was almost destined to be. So it's like it's hard to be critical, but yeah, you're right. You know, Device. You know, and look, and let's be honest as well. You know, Device. You always put it on Device because you expect him to be the one that steps up because he's fucking Device. But you know, Kjaerbye as well. You know,
he's had a bad few months, to be fair.
We are getting to that stage right now where it's like, you know, it's not failure to launch because he had the launch, right? But like, what happens to a young star in one of the best teams where if you think about all of the key rounds that Astralis won, it was either dupreeh or most notably Xyp9x, or Zipex, as he insists upon calling himself. But whatever, you're Xyp9x to me, motherfucker. He had so many mad clutch rounds, like, again, just cementing his status as the best clutcher in the game, like, in probable positions. And there wasn't just this series against SK, like throughout the tournament, he really sort of was like the guy that sort of, when the chips were down, you could sort of back him, pull something out and get you back to parity. But at that point, like, that's where your stars are meant to be like, woo, right, thanks for keeping this in there, Andreas. Now we're going to fucking step it up. I've got a gun this round. We're going to do it. And then,
like, if you told me, if the only information you gave me was, right, Astralis plays SK in the semis, these are the maps, and here's the frag totals of glaive and Xyp9x on the, I'll tell you, well, SK wins at 2-0. Yeah, obviously they win, right? Because think of all the other players of the firepower. So yeah, for sure they blow that one home, right? So to lose like they did, it's pretty underwhelming, I think.
Yeah, it was a bit fucked up. And like I say, I was kind of you're right. I think Kjaerbye's had a bad few months now, and that to me has got to be the one area of kind of concern for Astralis. You know, it can never be about Device. If Device has a bad series, he's fucking entitled to one now and then. Yeah, that's the nature of the beast.
Like, put it this way, there's a reason why no one has ever had a serious discussion about shall we cut Device? Because that's like an example of that old saying, like, you've got to like ride with the one who got you there, basically. Like, he's the whole reason you ever were in position to be a superstar team. Like, starting over with that, like, you have to give that player a lot more leeway than anyone else. Because the difference is you might be able to replace a Kjaerbye and get a better player, possibly, or a player that works better for your team. But the odds that you could even get someone who, with no Device on the team, would make your whole team better, it's pretty unlikely, isn't it? And you're going to have to give Device to fucking North or something, aren't you? So I don't think there's any universe anyone's considering that, really.
I mean, and to be fair as well, in regards to Device, in the 3rd and 4th place game with G2, he showed up in a big way.
At all.
Yeah, so this is an interesting debate.
3rd and 4th place games.
No, right. So this is interesting. I I was obviously watching the game. It was a good fucking series, by the way.
Okay.
It was like a really decent series, and just in case you don't know, G2 won it, right? It was a really good series. But I was watching Twitter sort of simultaneously, because I like to see what people are saying while the game's going on. Obviously, got to follow all the pros. So sometimes you might get a pro like say something, and I'll be like, "Oh, okay, that's enhanced my understanding of how that round went or whatever." And all it was just people from esports, and in particular the CS scene, saying, bloody third and fourth. Nobody wants these. And I was like, I mean, okay, they are in a way pointless games, but there's still like an additional 30K up for grabs. There's still sort of tournament ranking, bragging rights. This might go into like the HLTV ranking system, because obviously I would imagine you assign more points to someone who is inarguably third over someone who is inarguably fourth, and that can make a difference in terms of sponsorships, perceptions, blah blah blah, whatever the fuck. So, but everyone was just so universally against it. Even Yanko, by the way, who was on the fucking broadcast, just there taking an epicenter check. Meanwhile, mugging him off on Twitter, like, fuck your game. And look, and I understand it as well. Like, the fans were a little bit subdued because there was a lot of people there waiting for VP, like waiting for SK Gaming. They did want the main event. But as a warm-up to the final, this was pretty fucking good. So I don't know if I'm necessarily as staunchly in the let's never have a third and fourth place playoff camp. I think in the current climate, where we play way too many fucking games of Counter-Strike, yes, definitely don't have them. But the idea that they're completely without merit seemed to me a bit fucking mental. Like, loads of people like jumped on that bandwagon simultaneously, all like, it's like there was a little fucking Skype group I'm not invited in or something. Like, everyone was just tweeting about it. It's like, fucking hell, do people really feel this way? Never seen it before. And I actually, just on a final point before I get your opinion on it, MBK put something out. A tweet, like a twit longer, but it wasn't a twit longer. He'd like screenshotted, And he was like saying, just want to say Epicenter, the best tournament. Bloody love those third and fourth place playoff games. Like, was really proud of us winning it and all this. I didn't know if there was maybe like a little bit of sort of, come on, we want to keep doing these. Or whether that was just MBK sort of being like, well, we won, so definitely acknowledge that, So why can't we have them, Duncan? Why can't we have third and fourth place playoff games? What, are they that bad?
It's just, unfortunately, first of all, I've seen way too many that just looked like players weren't that 100% into it. So I have to say the general trend has been, first of all, I've seen a lot of upsets in them in my time where because the big problem is it's the same concept as the Olympics, isn't it? A person who couldn't win a race but gets a bronze goes, fucking hell, I got something. No one expected me to win. Whereas someone who could have won but comes second is like, fucking hell, I've blown my chance, haven't I? So it's the same principle. If you're like in this scenario, okay, I guess in this case, these teams are capable of winning, but generally, you'll get a team who has just blown the semi, and the other one's like, well, I lost my semi straight up. So it just doesn't make for generally great
when
games.
That happens, when I lose my semi, don't it?
Why not?
No, but I mean, okay, like, so there's a difference here. This is Epicenter with all of the best teams in the world competing at it. If DreamHack Denver had put on a third and fourth place fucking playoff, I'd have been like, fuck this, I'm out. No one wants to see that. No one wants to see Mouse Sports versus fucking whoever, you know what I mean? Like in a third and fourth place playoff map for an extra $5,000. That's ridiculous. Yeah, sure. But I think the prestigious tournaments, like I wouldn't be against them, for example, like a tournaments of the size of the major, the $250,000 tournaments, $500,000, $1 million tournaments, all these big ones, the ones that we remember, the ones we talk about for a long, time to come. I don't think having a third and fourth playoff match is the worst thing there. I think, the fans, they get the value for money from it. I think players obviously will get to earn a little bit more cash. It sort of more evenly distributes the prize pool in a way that's more reflective on merit. Because you've all seen those games where it's like someone has the clearly tougher semi-final. Okay. Well, if you finish third and fourth, you get the same amount of prize money if there's no third and fourth decider. But someone might have had a much tougher game. Someone might have had it, you know what I mean? Like, so I don't know. I'm not entirely against it.
I think a good idea actually is what they did at the Mykonos event, where what they did is one of the things that you won for winning the third place match was you got an invite to the next tournament. So that the team that finished fourth didn't get it. So in theory, you have something to play for, because then in your mind you can go, well, if we get the invite, we also could win that tournament. So I think that's not a bad way to balance it.
Yeah, and I think as well, like there's a fundamental problem with broadcasts, right? And you brought this up, and I brought this up. I don't know why we have to feel like we have to, like the fan must get every game sequentially in a row. Whereas, like, what would make more sense for me would be, and I don't want to go full LCS. LCS fucked up their broadcast numbers by doing this, where it was super convoluted. And if I want to watch this match, I got an LCS 1 or LCS 2 and LCS 3. I'm not necessarily talking about that. But, like, if you just had, I don't know, like 2 games being played simultaneously and fans of whichever fans of one team would go to that stream and fans of the other, it would make the broadcast days easier for talent, right? Because you wouldn't be working as long. It makes it easier on fans in attendance, because there is a sweet spot. I'll tell you that there is a sweet spot as a fan when you sat in an audience and you're watching a day's worth of games. Trust me, even if you're a super fan of CS, by hour 8, you're going to be bored off your tits and your ass is going to be sore in some bleacher chair. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you got to fucking get up and have a walk around. Maybe you want to go and do a player signing, but if I do that, I miss the next series. You got to try and cram stuff in. I don't know. So I think those super long days for fans sucks. So it's a tough one. But yeah, I definitely think this idea of having to sequentially show every best of 3 series it over the course of a day is a trend that I think will eventually phase out. It'll make more sense as we do broadcast moving forward. And obviously, in that environment, a 3rd and 4th place match isn't that bad, is it? Right? Like, if you haven't had like fatigue from being bombarded with every game when you want to get to a particular one. So, but yes, the final. So first off, before we even talk about the game, best of 5. Me and you have been up and down on best of 5s. I used to champion best of 5s. I said best of 5 is the only way to inarguably prove who's the better team, because sometimes you can be hostage to a stupid veto or a new map gets introduced, right? And now we got to ban that, and then that means we let one of our weaker maps through. And the best of 3, you can sometimes get good vetoes in your favor. You can get bad vetoes against you, depending on the circumstances and the professional sort of landscape. In a best of 5, hands down, if you win a best of 5 against any other team, then you are just inarguably the better team. But there's a problem with it. First of all, they are a fucking grueling marathon. This was like 6 hours of Counter-Strike played sequentially by these players. It was amazing to me that the level stayed as high as it did over the course of the final. I expected someone to drop off. And obviously as well, I know players don't particularly like them, whatever they might say publicly. I've talked to players who play best of 5s, and they're like, really? It just comes down to that one map, like, because it goes back and forth. So theoretically, it should go you win yours, they win theirs, you win yours. I know, obviously, that's what players say.
That's
right?
some stupid shit players say.
Yeah.
Same
obviously.
Player will then turn around. We can all beat each other at any day. Well, why doesn't this team ever win events? Yeah. Sorry?
Yeah, all right. But so I know players say that. But, generally, I used to be for them. I used to be a massive proponent of them. And then somewhere around about the time I went to that Ace of Predator Masters were fucking babam, where everything was just bad in the world. Like, there was a best of 7 final there, right? And I was like,
and that was 7 maps, if you remember. Well, I think they might have started 1-0 or something. I think it was at least 6 maps put out there.
Yeah, it was like that fucking GIF. I was just, you know what I mean? Just couldn't handle it, right? So, and after that point, I was like, yeah, actually, best of 5s are stupid. We should just stick to best of 3s in the final. Makes the veto more exciting, more tactical, blah, blah, blah. So I don't even know where I am. I personally still think now I'm back in the best of 3 camp.
I think best of 5s are too long. Rich. I think by listening to what you've been saying and by listening to what people who generally, as in people who, I respect their opinions. I don't think they're just random idiot plebs. The people who actually generally say they don't like best of 5s, I can summarize it like this.
Oh, God.
When it's a really rubbish matchup, like 2 teams that aren't good, no one wants to watch them play long. It's irrelevant as to whether it's 3 maps or 5. If they played a full 3-map series and it went overtime on every map, and both teams don't play well or they're both not good teams, you're not going to enjoy it. That's not an argument against best of 3. Likewise, when it's an amazing best of 5, like a couple that we all remember, this one, there was the one that, if you remember, Luminosity played against G2, that was a fucking banger, then we all love it. Now, that doesn't say either way that the format is good or bad. The format is only sort of the stage on which the matches take place. Yeah. So I agree, when you have a best of 5 where every map they maintain a high level, it's going to be the best possible format. Bear in mind, as I hope everyone would assume and understand, the best of 7 is not reasonable, is it? It's just logistically not reasonable. But a lot of the arguments, the problem with them is I don't think they're consistent. Like, for example, an argument people will say is, yeah, well, it could take, like, for example, in this case, 6 hours, right? The best of 3 can take 6 hours. What does that mean? We don't do best of 3s anymore? No. The point is that is in the most extreme case almost possible. Like, these were almost 5 really close maps. There was one that was a blowout, but that was it. You know, generally that's not going to happen in many best of 5s. You know, so I feel like a lot of the things people are complaining about definitely have merit. By the way, I agree. It's a slog, and sometimes it does go down to one map. And in this case, it was one map and overtime. But first of all, those are like mad outliers. I don't think that happens every time. Like, players who say that, I mean, players can just shut the fuck up, can't they? Like, the MSL would probably tell you that, and then you'd go, mate, didn't you get 2-0'd in the best of 3 on two of your best maps? Yeah, but you got to understand. Hey, he's not finished, but I don't know how to do an Danish accent. I'll work on that one. I'll make a note. Timestamp that. I should get my own assistant, shouldn't I? To just timestamp shit for me to do. But anyway, basically the gist of it is, I think that all formats have pros and cons, and I personally like the pros for this one, but I do always add the caveat. I like best of 5s, but I don't want them every tournament. I think you should only do it if you're like one of the biggest tournaments, basically. Like, if you're Epicenter or you're E-League, or I mean, obviously E-League wouldn't do it because of TV, but, in a world where they just were hosting a massive tournament, or you are a major, I'd like it if you had a best of 5, because I agree with the original points that you were making. I think it does kind of show who the better team was, Sure. And I also like the fact, for example, like, think of ESL New York, because FaZe really did 3-0 the best of 5. It made their dominance even more staggering, right? That was actually ridiculous, because then you couldn't even use the excuse that you normally have in a best of 3 if you get blown out, which is never got in the game, did I? Yeah, but you still put 3 whole maps.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? Right? When you watch it,
it's great for history. It's not always great for viewers.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? And the best of 5 format is never more laid bare as being poor. You make the strongest argument for it being poor when there's a 3-0. Yes. Because those best of 5s are so dull to watch. Once a team gets to 2-0 and they're ahead in the 3rd map, and it's going to be that 3-0 blowout, like, it just makes it really flat. In many ways, like, a super one-sided final ruins a lot of tournaments. You talk to commentators, and again, without naming names or talking out of school, you'll get a lot of commentators that were like, thank fuck I didn't have to cast the finals. Yes. Because the semi-finals are usually the more exciting games. It's rare finals deliver. Everyone wants the semis with the best fucking teams in, because that's usually going to deliver.
By the way, since you referenced what players say, because, by the way, we have to consider that there's obvious bias in what players say. Like, for example, in a best of 5, logically, if you are any team except, like, maybe the top 3 in the world, you should say no best of 5s, because your chances of winning the fucking final go massively up. Like Virtus.pro could have won this final absolutely in 3 maps. If you played the first 3 maps the same, for sure. But their chances went down when you play more maps, Now SK's advantage builds. But the other factor is, same with talent. Like, by the way, when I say I want best of 5s to these massive tournaments, I am acting against my own interest in my job. I get paid the exact same, whether it's a best of 1 or a fucking best of 9 million. I have to just do extra games for you cunts for free, stay extra time, get less sleep, watch games. Sometimes, because you watch 5 whole maps, that one player, that is definitely shit, has one good half, and you're all like, what about that then? Like, I didn't say he could never operate a mouse. He's not fucking Michael J. Fox, is he? Like, obviously he can play Counter-Strike. But yeah, it would be my interest to say best of 3s only, and to say let's have best of 1 group stages, and let's never have best of 3s, and let's just have randomizers. And I could say all this shit, but I actually just want what's best for, like, the history of the game, if possible.
Yeah.
Including that I'm plastered all over that motherfucking history. That I'm inside. I'm like the fucking, who was that guy? the comedian in the opening of that movie version of Watchmen, shit movie by the way, but the opening obviously he was doing all that stuff in the background of history, you know. So
he killed JFK.
I'd love to do that. That's what I'd do. If I had a time machine, I'd go back and I'd shoot first.
What's wrong?
Because then it'd fuck with everyone's head. Because then even like the Russians or whoever would be like, "What the fuck? That was our plan."
Why? What are you even saying? Why have you turned into Carl Pilkington, mate?
What good theory?
You're mentally ill. Right. Anyway, so let's talk about the final. Best of 5, amazing final. SK Virtus Pro, and I guess this is as good a time as any to start talking about Virtus Pro. They weren't shit after all, Duncan. It was all a ruse. Now, I mean, obviously, that's what people are saying now. Like, they always bloody had it in them. I don't know, mate. Like, this was so weird because it wasn't like we were watching the same team. And for a change, what happened was, when they made mistakes, they didn't capitulate. In fact, they went the other way. They were able to elevate individual levels of play. Like, over the course of this tournament, I even tweeted about some of them. I saw Pasha make some sort of questionable decisions with like money management and just general like peaking and stuff. Didn't hurt them too much. Neo had his best performance in a long, long time. Bialy as well. Like, everybody's individual levels of performance were up for this tournament. And again, it's one of those intangibles. Like, I can't put my finger on what it was. What changed? They weren't arguing with each other. They were smiling while they were playing again. Now, as
far as I know, this is the first tournament, by the way, where they made the in-game leader change.
What wrong with that? I don't know, because you never know what they're doing with in-game.
No, I believe they said that this is the one where they officially changed it to Taz, I think, as the in-game leader now.
And was that put out by the Taz?
I think it was actually finally put out, like, officially, you know. It wasn't just like rumors like they kept saying before, where they were like cockteasing, like, maybe we are changing. Like, come on, mate, it's not a mystery, is it? There's no clues here.
I've just had a press release from Taz.com that the run to the final was all me and my in-game leadership. Is that pretty much what you're saying?
Yeah.
I don't know, because sometimes they say we've changed it, then they say they're trolling, then they say it's Neo, then they say it was always Taz, and they just seem to fuck with you all the time, you know what I mean? So I don't know, but yeah, probably.
But, I mean, I think that's an interesting piece of context in terms of this tournament, because that is something that might have changed something within the squad, you know.
I mean, so there was still some issues. It wasn't like it was vintage Virtus Pro in the sense that I still felt Snacks was a little bit missing, actually. Like, he wasn't, it's not that he was bad. He just sort of was a little bit underwhelming. I was expecting, you know, if I was to say to you, hey, Virtus Pro had a great run to the finals and lost the best of 5 against SK Gaming in a thrilling back and forth matchup, you'd be like, oh, well, Snacks must have been balling out of control. Kind of wasn't. I mean, he was just decent, you know, and maybe if he had been, it could have been the difference maker. But overall, I mean, fuck me, what a transformation. I don't even know, like I say, how to sort of quantify it. How a player like Neo, who goes from being like fucking really poor.
He had some really bad tournaments recently. Like, for people who don't realize, the reason you don't know that he had those bad tournaments is because we've mentioned this on past shows. He is one of the only players none of the people who are analysts and journalists call out. They never call him out.
Never do it. And look, here's why, though. I've got to say, when you have a long tenure as a pro, a lot, right, people probably don't understand this, but a lot of it comes down to, like, interactions over the course of your career, you know? Like, Neo's never called you out or me out or any analyst out. He's never called a reporter a liar. He's just been a model professional his entire career, been at some, you know, at various points in his career, the best, inarguably in 1.6 when he was the best. He was God tier. And has had this great career where he's been a super nice, professional, quiet dude. Doesn't even call out opponents, like, ever.
Yeah.
Never aggrandizes himself. I remember one time when I had a friend at a major, and I was like, "Oh, this is Neo, the best Counter-Strike player of all time," and he was like, "Don't call me that." Like, he hates it, right? So when you build up all that good faith over such a long career, obviously you are bulletproof to a
for
certain
sure.
degree.
No,
We
but
all know.
if you were a fan, you would think by no one commenting, like, he must have just been doing fine, you know? I mean, Snacks obviously was doing badly. Oh, I'm sure Snacks was doing bad. You would think, he can't have been doing that badly. No, he really had like the worst period of his entire career in the last 3 months, basically.
Yeah, and like I said, obviously we all know we're not stupid. We know he's been playing like shit for months, but you're just like, it's bloody can't do it to Philip, can I?
Sure.
So then we just sit here and we go, I wonder what's up with EP, you know, and. I guess we kind of kept it a bit real, like on the last one, because we did say, why do people keep assuming they're going to get back to being the best when you've got players who are in the, like 30s, like, or thereabouts? Like, why would, kids, wives, why would they just be good now? Just because they were once? It doesn't work like that. Does it? I mean, obviously, if that was the case, my boy fucking Karl Malone, the best ever, would still be fucking slamming it down.
The thing. What really boggles my mind, though, Rich, is how dishonest like the fucking storylines are. Like the story, I'll tell you the storyline for this tournament in terms of Neo. Right, it goes like this. This was the worst year of his career. He was playing the worst of his entire, however long you want to make it, 14-year career, 15-year career. He was playing by far the worst ever. But at this one tournament, he came out of it and had an amazing tournament, one of his best in CSGO. He probably would have been the MVP if they'd have won the final. But that is not to say, wow, look, at 30, you can still be an amazing player. No, he had one tournament. Like, actually, if anything, he's making a hell of a case that when you're 30, you can't do it like you used to do when you were younger, because he doesn't. Like, anyone who took that conclusion, like, look at this mad outlier. Who said that can't happen all the time? Well, you just did. It's an outlier. Statistically, it doesn't make any sense. He's had like 2 tournaments this year that were good. There was Vegas and this one. Aside from that, they've all been average. And then earlier, before this tournament, terrible, really bad. So that is amazing, and it is a feat in its own right. But it's actually a feat in the context of being one of the oldest players. It's amazing that you can still do it for one tournament. I don't know why people have to go so hard one way or the other. Like, he has to either be so washed up he can never play good again, or he has to be totally back and it's no problem and he's amazing even as a 30-year-old one. Like, come on. Those are both ludicrous polls, aren't they?
Yeah.
Speaking of ludicrous polls, Neo's performance in the final.
Yeah.
Watch it on reruns on an amazing made-up channel I made up now, Thorin TV.
I'm amazed you weren't about to plug Snipe or something there.
Would be good.
But anyway, I mean,
from his POV.
But it was like you say, a great final. Virtus Pro absolutely in it. What's kind of confused me though is this reaction from the fans that like, oh, Virtus Pro are back now. Like, none of the problems.
Mad, isn't it?
Yeah, like none of the problems exist because he had this good tournament run, and it's like, dudes, it's one tournament, and this is the worst slump Virtus Pro have been in ever historically. This is actually the outlier making it to the final of Epicenter. It's not the norm, right? And it's been like that for what, 6 months?
And let's add in as well, it's not like they smashed everyone. They had some close games on the way. That G2 one wasn't exactly in the bag, was it?
So I was like, this is a strange reaction. I mean, I don't know if they're going to go on and be like Virtus Pro again, and people are just going to forget about this dark period of history where they were like losing to no-namers in all their online matches and fucking it up in qualifiers to a point where we're like, are they even going to get invited to any more? If they don't get invited to a tournament, could they even qualify? Probably not. And would people withdraw the invites right now?
But by the way, I have to say, I actually do think legitimately I think that Virtus Pro did actually make a lot of tournament organizers act in a manner that was inappropriate. Like, I think when you're like 6 months into a fucking slump where you've had like half a tournament that was good, it's starting to get inappropriate to invite that team as one of your 6 invites just because they have fans. Like, in the past, I could understand when you made a case for like, I've invited Cloud9 over Gambit to ESL1 Clone because, first of all, those 2 teams are around the same level anyway. So if then the tipping factor is one has loads of fans, fair play. But when you're inviting VP over like G2 just because you think VP has more fans, like, come on, that's getting egregious now. You know, I think they did that. Unfortunately, I have a lot of time for tournament organisers where I know they have a tough job and they've got to fill the seats, but I think they went too far on that example. I realise it's a very extreme example because you'll never have a team that popular in theory is that bad, but I think they did go a bit too far on that.
Yeah, and real talk as well. We're only going to get to a fucking worse place. Like,
yeah, God forbid where it would have been in 3 months from now if they'd continued on that downward trend.
Yeah, but I mean, with businesses that own tournaments, and then it's like, well, obviously we're going to invite our teams. I mean, this is now, look, I'm not even going to bring it up because I saw like a thread on Reddit and it was like, can we just take a moment to appreciate that 2 ES Force teams are in the final of an ES Force run tournament? And they're even missing out how pretty much all the sponsors are owned by ES Force as well, you know? And there's other problematic issues with the business structure. But I've been talking about this for 2 years, longer, forever. Yeah. Conflict of interest in esports and how we've got to be mindful of it and how it can inadvertently undermine competitive integrity. Like, for example, imagine a world where Virtus.pro won this tournament overall. I guarantee you there would be a significant percentage of people, usually the types of morons that cry about skins, sure, who tweet me every time there's an outlier result in online CS going, you need to look into this, Richard. NRG are throwing, are they? Fucking hell, they can't buy a win. What you talking about, you daft cunt? Fucking obviously. NRG in any position to be able to say, yeah, we can play within our means and make this look legit. They're fucking terrible. What are you talking about? So you fucking... But if VP had won, I would have got messages like, well, there it was all a con. Virtus.pro deliberately played bad for 6 months so they could come to this tournament where they probably had cheats on their PC and they powered their way to a win so people can make money on gambling, right? That would literally be emails that I received. Yeah, but imagine being Virtus.pro and dealing with that. Those people saying that it was all just some grand conspiracy rather than like, we finally did it. We won a tournament, you know? So I was kind of relieved in a way when SK Gaming won. I was actually sad for Virtus.pro because obviously I know the boys, known them for years, like the boys. But that's legit how the landscape would have been. Now, you've got to fucking, right, you own these players, ES Force. You've got to insulate them from that by not having them at your tournaments. I'm sorry. It sucks, but you have made a business decision to run a tournament and to run teams. Never the twain can meet, in my opinion, if you want to keep the spirit of integrity pure.
Let's just put it this way, Rich, right? I agree there was a thread. And in general, people will make comments. But when they make the comments, they tend to be in the context of banter. Like most people are just joking, haha, ES Force team won versus ES Force. I guess ES Force is the winner, you know. Yeah. Even then, no one actually really seems to think that it's a big problem. Now, I can tell you 2 reasons why that is. Because why would fans of SK Gaming and Virtus.pro be against ES Force? They love ES Force. 2 of the most popular teams in the entire scene. So I think that it just shows how corrupt fans are ethically. Because if this was fucking ESL and you knew that, like, I mean, pick a team, it'll have to be a different one. Let's say that, like, for example, well, okay, here's a great one. Let's say that SK wasn't owned by ES Force. It was still owned, you know, by German people, and they all had the connections to ESL like they used to back in the day.
Oh, you can do it. Let's say G2 Fnatic. Let's say G2 Fnatic, because Jens Hilgers obviously has had ties to both, right?
In that setting, every time there was ever a result like this, it'd be all threads all over the place. Fucking, this is corruption. How dare you do this? Like, how can we know this result was legit? But somehow, actually, this is like the elephant in the room that people mention every now and then, but they don't seem to think it's an actual problem. I mean, here's the thing. Okay, I don't know anything about the business, right? So I will never make any claims. But I have to say, I'm actually amazed beyond, like, first of all, if I was Valve, I'd immediately be investigating this. I'd be checking all skin transfers for matches between SK and VP at a fucking tournament like this. Secondly, if I was a government, I'd be looking into, like, wait a minute. So you own the team that you pay the salary to, and you're going to pay them their prize money, which in a way, some of it goes back to you. Like, I mean, all I have to say is the term money laundering would immediately come up with any fucking governmental agency. You know, I don't know any of these things, but I'm amazed you can even run things on this level and not have to worry about that if it's really not a problem. So forget us worrying about the ethics of fucking esports. These are actually like legitimately big problems to have in the real world, you know.
Yeah, but this is what I mean. It's like if you think about like just any other industry, you think about like antitrust laws, monopoly laws in like the US, where it was, I believe, I think was it Google?
They've been
Uh,
hit with a bunch.
yeah. So YouTube were originally, I think, or Alphabet Incorporated, the parent company of Google and YouTube, were looking at the Twitch acquisition before it went to
Yes,
Amazon.
yes, it was. It was just before Amazon. Yes,
Yeah,
right.
no, this was reported, and apparently, what put that deal on hiatus was it was put on hold while the antitrust group, the monopolies group in America, investigated it to see whether or not it would be unethical for Alphabet Incorporated to own both YouTube and Twitch, and therefore effectively monopolize all online streaming, especially for gaming. And as a result, Amazon were able to come in, gazump them, get that $970 million deal, and the rest is fucking history. Now, it's interesting, isn't it, that a business not so far removed from what we do in esports is being subject to this level of scrutiny. Yet in esports, everyone else is like, la 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 la. Like, this is all fine. This is all fine. As long as the fireworks display keeps going off and I'm entertained, who gives a flying fuck? And I've given up on it, mate. I've just given up on it. I don't think it's a nut we're ever going to crack until someone gets caught doing something really fucking bad. And then that's what's going to wake people up. It was like with match fixing. We all knew it was going on. We all knew teams were doing it. We know it was going on at the highest level. Now, after iBuyPower, everyone thinks everything's a fix. It's gone completely the other way. You couldn't get away with a match fix these days unless you were some tier 2, tier 3 shitters who don't care because they're never going to a major anyway, And yeah, sure, it still goes on. It still exists. I don't know what it would take on a business level for people to be like, oh yeah, this is bad. Like maybe it would take a tournament organizer giving okay, so let's say a tournament organizer did the setups and did the PCs, and then a player discovered that the team that tournament organizer owns always plays in that booth, and they went into that booth, and then they realized all the PCs were significantly better, and the monitors were 144 hertz or whatever we're up to now, 200 hertz, and they had like inarguably a worse setup, and it was to give them an advantage. Would that do it? Would that make people outraged enough to give a fuck? I don't even know. But we're at a stage right now where we've literally had a major tournament, a $500,000 tournament, sponsored by companies that are owned by this tournament organizer's parent company, with two teams owned by the parent company in the fucking grand final, with betting on it as well, by the way. And everyone's just gone, wasn't that a great final? I've even said, because I've just given up at this point. I don't think you're ever going to get the esports audience to give a fuck, frankly.
And obviously, esports itself is so small that there's actually no financial benefit to investigating these things. Like, the reason why someone will investigate corporate corruption in the real world is when you break that story successfully, you will become one of the most famous journalists in the world. Think about that Glenn Greenwald guy. No one knew who the fuck he was until he did all that Edward Snowden stuff. Now he's mega well known and is probably an authority on certain types of journalism. Likewise, most of the people who've won the fucking Pulitzer Prize and all that sort of shit, these are people who have done amazing shit. So there's a massive incentive for your life, and you don't just have to do it for being a good guy. In esports, there's no incentive. It will absolutely kill your career. You will be in massive trouble. Like, people forget this. This is one of the ones that I find most disturbing, is if you hadn't investigated that iBuyPower throw, it would 100% never have gotten them caught. They, to this day, would have just gotten away with it. And also, because they wouldn't have gotten caught and banned like that, I think it would have happened much more. And it would have kept going until, at the very least, CS got really big and people maybe just thought, like, nah, I'm getting paid so much now, maybe I won't do it. It would have happened a lot more. And it's not like if you didn't do it, right? There was another journalist hot on your heels who was almost going to get... There was no one. In fact, you were going to Valve over and over, right? Like, I've got more evidence. Oh, I need more than that, mate. Going away, having to get fucking the phone and all that shit. It's mental, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'll tell you, fucking, this is how crazy it was. Another journalist gave me some of the evidence because they were like, well, I'm not touching this one. Fuck this. And I was like, well, why don't you want this story? This will be a career breakout story for you. And they were like, it definitely won't. It'll fucking end me and no one will believe me because I'm a no-namer. I was like, all right, well, I'll do the legwork. Appreciate it, giving me the tip. And that was how I got the original screenshots of like Shazam telling people that it was a throw, you know?
Yeah.
That was from another journalist. People always assume in those screenshots it's me talking to Shazam. Absolutely not. It was another journalist that he told, not realizing he was a journalist. And when the penny dropped and he was like, "Oh wait, you're a journalist," he was like, "You better not report this," and he didn't. That's the climate we exist in, where if you call out anything of like the power players in the industry, you get completely fucking ruined. And
Which
you
is
get
also,
ruined
I mean,
by the people you're doing it for.
Funny thing is, you can relate this actually to a concept that I brought up in a video, I think it was like last month or something. I did a video along these lines where I made the point, right, that a reason why you don't want to go too far, as people have done throughout the history of esports, and be like, we're already in the mainstream. I made the point, right, wait a minute. So we had no governments around the world until last year interested in the fact millions were being bet online anonymously from fucking matches in countries sometimes where, you know, gambling requires licensing. No government gave a fuck until last year. You had all these other things, like, for example, people just traveling around without work visas, doing work for massive events, broadcast to millions of people. These are actually signs that, yes, esports is close to the mainstream, but it is not in the mainstream, because in the mainstream, everyone who knows any sort of industry in real life, it's a fucking nightmare. It's like that old Doug Stanhope joke. You need a fucking fishing license to put a fishing rod into a fishing hole. You can't do basic things in life. They've gotten every little niche carved out. So if we have got these massive things going on, it shows that actually there are no industry controls. There is no industry oversight or anyone checking this. It hasn't even gotten to a level yet, bizarrely, where governments even seem to care.
And that's why they're doing it. That's why people.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the most obvious. It's one of the last gigs in town, right?
Yeah, it's this uncharted virgin territory where you can just be unethical, and there's no one who can stop you. There's no regulatory body, you know. And this is what really fucking annoys me. Like, you know, for example, now, right? Like, take case opening. Now, right, for me, case opening just in games was always just an additional extra bit of fun. You wanted to spend a bit of money on a game to get a particular item, cosmetic or otherwise, you could spend a little bit of money, completely optional. And then people started getting greedy and then started embedding it into the game. Then you had, like in CSGO, case opening websites that are just programmed to fuck your face off, right, repeatedly. Meanwhile, they can just rig it so they don't even have to pay the influencers that lie to you about how good this website is, because they can give them skins, which you should be getting, but you can never win, because it's rigged in the back end on a hard-coded level that they will always get the knives. They will get X amount of knives when they stream, you know? It's pre-programmed, right? And then now we get to a stage where there's mainstream games just dropping loot boxes and loot crates into actual games. And then we had a video that I did recently. It was revealed Activision Blizzard in 2015 patented a method that would basically sacrifice your gaming experience in matchmaking, so it would influence you to buy more items. They were exploring that technology. So now, as a result of all of this fucking unfettered, unchecked greed, right? Obviously, now the governments have come calling, saying our loot case is gambling, is case opening gambling. And trust me, there's going to be a fuck ton of legislation, and another good thing's going to get ruined, and it's going to fuck it up for the average gamer, right? And people that just wanted this nice additional optional extra. And I'll tell you who it's not going to be fucked over for. Every little greedy fucking cunt businessman and games developer and fucking case opening site owner and all of this, who fucked all of their consumers. They're off. They're sailing off into the sun on a yacht, retired by 30 fucking 5, right? And they ripped you all off. And they're the people that get put on the fucking pedestal. They're the people that everyone looks up to and goes, oh, yeah, they'd never do that. That YouTuber would never lie to me and take payment in fucking knives and lie to me. I'm his fan. He wouldn't lie to me. But you, Richard, you're a journalist. So you trade in lies and smear and gossip and rumors. You're the scumbag. That's the climate we exist in. And as a result of that, these people don't even fucking know it. I guarantee.
Funny thing is, I've actually never. I realize this could happen in real life in mainstream journalism, but I've actually never seen in esports anyone who got like a legitimate like reputation. You know, not just like a one-off journalist, but someone who was in journalism for many years, who ever used stories to just lie and attack people he didn't like. I've never actually seen that happen in esports. It might have been the odd small person, never seen it happen, but I've seen it happen non-stop in all the other areas. I mean, I recently had someone who is literally an industry figure employed by teams come forwards and publicly lie about something that had happened in a team he was involved in that he directly had knowledge of. I knew he had knowledge of it through the players in that team, but because I would not break my sources, I couldn't come out and publicly show he was lying. So in this story, right, you have to just take my word for it, obviously, in it. But this person could have been like, if I was willing to, put it this way, if we both played by the same rules and I just said, whatever he does, I will do, I would win. But in doing so, I would obviously lose because I would have no ethics, would I? Yeah. But you'd be amazed the amount of stuff where everyone except journalists does it and it's just accepted. Well, people will even say, well, you've got to sort of lie for your players, and protect them. So, do you? I didn't realise it was allowed to lie as long as it's your mate or something. Like, fucking hell.
Yeah, and when you're called out as a public figure, you must absolutely throw under the bus any out-of-context private conversations. It's completely all right for you to do that. Me being bound by an ethical code, meaning I can't reveal sources, will never have that luxury, can never win, can never get the conversations that maybe occurred before it that completely prove you wrong. Can't show those, unfortunately. Can't even necessarily show the emails that I got.
About this, right? The stupidest part of that logic is they imply that you lied, right? And because you can't prove it, well, you could just made it up. Right, if that's true, why am I stopping then? Why don't I just come up with the next lie that makes me win again and go, actually, you're wrong, mate. You did say it. And in fact, there's 10 witnesses and I'm on a source to what? No one does that, do they?
Yeah, it's like you say, man, honestly, this is why I just gave up talking about the issue. I know people wanted me to talk about it on the show, but honestly, what is there
to go, is there?
Yeah. What more is there to talk about?
Everyone's letting it die down again.
Yeah, what more is there to talk about? You're gonna have a refresh team at a refresh event. You're gonna have an ES Force team at an ES Force event. You got WISA teams going at WISA sanctioned events. You all like this. You all obviously like this because you're not boycotting the streams. You're not boycotting the teams. You're not putting any pressure on the organization. And every time a journalist writes about it, you go after them. So fuck you, right? Like, trust me, when you're sat there wondering where your fucking game went and wondering why can't I have faith in the results? Why can't I have faith in the pros? Why can't I use the websites or the products that they endorse without getting gypped, right? You're going to fucking have to just wake up to the fact that it was you all along because you didn't give a shit when it fucking mattered. And the people that were trying to warn you about the danger signs of where this leads to, you fucking ignored them all. Or you called them cunts, or you told them you were going to kill them if you ever saw them at an event. So enjoy it. Enjoy the sewer. We're all here now. Yeah. Fuck them. Anyway, right. So final point. Don't want to end on that. So just one last thing and then we'll bail. Obviously, congrats to SK Gaming for winning Epicenter. Great tournament, loads of great moments, and despite all the things I've said there, it was a good event.
It was a fantastic event.
Problematic, but
here's the thing: aside from those ethical concerns, top to bottom, what a great event! What
a great event! Yeah.
This is an event where, because you had 7 of the top 8 ranked teams, having best of 3s in every match in the group stage was amazing. It was actually legitimately great. Got you loads of great matches. Obviously, the final was fantastic. The teams that all the storylines were great. I mean, in general, there weren't many. We pointed out the North team, like they were a little bit underwhelming. Everything else, everyone else played at a high level. It was pretty fantastic. I think it's one of the tournaments of the year for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So look, here was the last story.
It shouldn't exist.
Yeah, exactly. It just shouldn't exist in its current form. That's all there is to it. Fucking brilliant.
Or with any of the teams in the final.
Yeah. That's how fucked up it is. That's how mental it is.
That just summarizes esports, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's brilliant. Shouldn't exist. So anyway, Fetish, the coach of Heroic.
Okay.
Well, he's quit. He stood down last week. Yeah. And I thought this was weird. We were just talking about, how he'd seemed to have done a good job. Heroic were really coming together as an international team, starting to step it up, getting some good results, surprising people at E-League. People were starting to take them more seriously. And yeah, he was out. And he gave this statement, which I'll read to you. He says, first of all, it's been a pleasure working with the Heroic players. It's been a great learning process for all. We've accomplished some really good things. And also working with Refresh and experiencing the organization's attitude towards the game. Definitely not held to gunpoint here. players training and working as true professionals has been a great experience for me. And I can only say I wish I had the opportunity to work in such an environment when I was an active player. We've certainly come a long way since I started. I leave the team to focus on other things, including my family, which also forced me to stay at home for personal reasons during E-League. But I'd like to thank all of the heroic players from Refresh, and I wish nothing but the best for all of them. I'm sure the team will bounce right back from this and fulfill their potential. And equally as well, the director of sports at Refresh Entertainment, Heroic's parent company, said, yeah, it's been great working with Henrik, both as a person and a professional, blah, blah, blah. We had some good talks about this situation. And I respect Henrik's decision to direct his focus where he is needed. And we wish him all the best. We're now actively searching for a new coach. Now, you know me, I like to read between the lines. I can't imagine that Fetish wanted to necessarily leave. Right, you know, even if he's got a family or whatever, you just take maybe diminished responsibility. Maybe you do prep, but you don't travel to the events. You can stay at home. You work something out, you know, because it seemed to be working. It seemed to be a good relationship. And then in that statement as well, the director of sports says we had good talks, as if there was some sort of back and forth to be had, right? But then equally as well, I think it's quite telling. No statement from a player, which you usually see in this situation. So I don't know what's gone on there, but it does seem a strange parting of the ways. What do you think?
I mean, one of the weird things is, from what I know about all those Refresh teams, like the ones that used to be called player-owned, but thankfully are now no longer named that anymore.
Yeah.
Is that one of the things that's been very good for them is they have had all these resources. Like, I don't think it's a coincidence that, admittedly, okay, they didn't exactly have massive peaks, but they all rose up. Godsent, Heroic, all rose up from being teams that had a couple of players you knew, but otherwise brand new orgs that no one's ever heard of, to having periods where they were pretty decent, or were at the big tournaments or at majors or whatever it was, because they had all these resources. So it does seem a little bit suspicious that he's disappeared as a coach, because you would think that logically would be one of the best gigs he could get at this point in time. And there's not many people out there in terms of coaching talent in the pool of people you can draw from. So that does actually say to me something along the lines of, if I had to guess, that the team's just said, we tried this guy being the coach, get him out, it didn't work. You know, that would be my assumption.
Yeah, and it's strange as well, because if you remember, there was fucking the issue where it was put on Fetish that he benched Valde, yes, wasn't it? Because you know, I don't know if you would ever give a coach that sort of authority.
I'd like to live in a world where we did. I just find it a bit implausible, you know.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah, I agree with you on that. And obviously, we know he was sold to North, and it was quite a lucrative sale. And we also know that Refresh, you know, they control all of the sort of player movements and everything, even when your contract expires due to specific terminology in the contract. So I think it was very interesting that they kind of put it on Fetish. And I just wonder if, I don't know, there's more to this than meets the eye. It's something I'll probably dig into, because I think this,
like, you think he was the scapegoat on that one. Like, we're going to say that you've benched this player. Oh, and then it didn't work out, so we're going to have to.
Yeah. I think once you're on the payroll at Refresh, you have to own certain decisions that maybe you don't, in the same way that maybe you own certain teams that you certainly don't. But, you know, it's a strange situation. It seemed to be working. I don't understand why anybody would sort of break up a winning formula. And the whole idea that all of a sudden, out of the blue, during talks, Henrik decides to be like, I just want a family life now. You know, it doesn't necessarily chime true.
No, here's the thing, right? You'll back me up on this, Rich. Knowing people, as we now do, getting into our 30s, knowing people who are old school players, people who are casters and used to be players, all the people I know who are married, as in like proper family life, married, kids, what they do is, the reason they fucking love esports is because that is their little hobby where they get away from their home life. Like, no one wants to be cooped up all day with their family. You want to spend time with your family, quality time, ideally. No one wants to spend all the time with anyone. You know, if you had to spend 24/7 with your mate, you'd get fucking sick of them after a while. You know, so in that setting, when you say, I want to spend more time with my family, that is the equivalent of those players back in the day who, when they retired or left a team at age 21, would be like, I want to focus more on my studies. No, you don't, because the whole point of esports was to get the fuck away from your studies and not have to do them all day. So that's just what you say, because you can't just go, I'm just going to go and cry.
To put it in context, the line I'm now going to spend more time with my family. That's what politicians say when they get caught fucking the maid, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like it's a line that definitely has like a loaded connotation. It's like a nothing. It's like a throwaway statement. But whatever. Anyway, that's the fucking show. We've talked about all the shit. We gave you a super long one today, which means you probably won't see the VOD for ages because we'll have to cut everything out because Thorin's fucking outrageous and is trying to get me fired for some reason. Don't know why. But anyway, that means
no injustice in this world.
See, he just keeps going. It is a great injustice, yes. So all that remains to be done is to thank our $100 plus patrons, Chris Enwin, the executive producer with $380, Dean Tanglis, Big Hungry, Mateus Pietkowski, Detlef Insomniac, and Jerky.
Just a few seconds left here. 7-6 left. Freiburg goes for the kill. He's going to pick it up. If Just Exists survives, he's going to win the round. There's no time. Oh my God, Freiburg! Are you kidding me? Win the round because of it. Yeah, now Freiburg is going to be walking around.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of By the Numbers. We had a week off, unfortunately, due to Sam being out in the wilderness. He's getting work now. Sam thinks he's a celebrity. So that's that. He doesn't even turn up to work anymore because he's living that high life in Asia, Bucharest, wherever else will have him. Right? But we got Phil as a stand-in. This is Philip, who he works for Room on Fire. Is that right? Or there he is. So Phil's doing it now. He doesn't have as good a laugh as Sam. But in many ways,
he is German, to be fair. He's born with a disability in that sense. So
yeah. Humor, not.
Just a few seconds left here. 7-6 left. Freiburg goes for the kill. He's going to pick it up. If Just Exists survives, he's going to win the round. There's no time. Oh my God, Freiburg! Are you kidding me?